It began with paperwork, with ink, stamps, and silence. Not with guns or bombs, but with memos typed behind closed doors in Berlin. Yet from those quiet offices came some of the most monstrous decisions in human history. This was the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, or RSHA, Hitler's Central Office of Terror, the institution that transformed ideology into machinery and bureaucracy into death. Created to bring all of Nazi Germany's intelligence and police services under one roof, the RSHA was more than an office. It was the brain of the totalitarian state, a system of files and orders that controlled everything from surveillance to genocide. Its clerks and commanders wove together the Gestapo, the SD, and the criminal police into a single web of fear, secrecy, and absolute control. It was here that terror was organized, categorized, and justified, all with the calm precision of administration. This is the entire history of the RSHA, the story of how one office turned a modern state into a killing machine, and how the most chilling weapon of the Third Reich was not a bomb but a desk. The RSHA was born in 1939, just weeks before the outbreak of the Second World War. Germany stood on the edge of conquest, and Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, sought total dominance over every form of intelligence and policing. To achieve it, he needed a central authority, a structure that would fuse ideology, information, and violence into one. He chose as its architect a man whose intelligence was matched only by his ruthlessness, Reinhard Heydrich, cold, calculating, and ambitious. Heydrich envisioned an organization that would not only protect the Reich, but shape its destiny. When he combined the Sicherheitsdienst (SD), the SS intelligence service, with the Gestapo, the secret state police, and the Kripo, the criminal police, the result was the RSHA, the Reich Security Main Office. It was bureaucracy reborn as a weapon. Inside its walls on Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, the RSHA operated like a hive, 6 departments known as Amtsgruppen, each responsible for a different aspect of terror. Department I handled administration and law. Department 2 oversaw ideology, ensuring every file and policy aligned with Nazi doctrine. Department 3, the SD Inland, collected intelligence on German society, mapping thought and loyalty across the population. Department T Albi, the Gestapo, was the beating heart of repression, hunting enemies, real or imagined, through interrogation, torture, and fear. Department Phi, the Kripo, handled ordinary crime, though nothing in the Reich was ever truly ordinary again. And Department C, the Foreign Intelligence Branch, extended the RSHA's reach across Europe, monitoring diplomats, agents, and occupied nations. Together, they formed an invisible empire, feeding information upward and orders downward, until terror became efficient, automated, and unstoppable. Under Heydrich's leadership, the RSHA became the nervous system of the Nazi state. Every police officer, every informant, every spy ultimately answered to it. Through meticulous record-keeping and endless reports, it knew who said what, who lived where, and who believed in what. It watched churches, schools, factories, and homes. It compiled racial charts, tracked correspondence, and filled archives with the names of those deemed undesirable. To the RSHA, human lives were lines in a file, statistics to be sorted, categorized, and erased. The men who filled its offices were not monsters in appearance, but bureaucrats in uniforms, intelligent, efficient, and utterly convinced of their purpose. They did not think in blood, but in numbers. That was their genius, and their horror. When war came, the RSHA expanded like a virus. In every occupied country, Its agents followed the German army, the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units, operating under its command. Their mission: eliminate political enemies, intellectuals, partisans, and entire communities of Jews. These were not spontaneous massacres, but organized operations, guided by orders from Berlin, signed and stamped by the RSHA. Between 1939 and 1941, millions perished under their supervision, in forests, fields, and ravines that became silent graves. The RSHA didn't pull every trigger, but it provided the lists, the logistics, the rationale. It defined who was to die and why, turning ideology into policy and murder into method. The office's power reached its terrible peak in 1942, when Heydrich convened the Wannsee Conference, a meeting that transformed the vague idea of the Jewish question into the concrete machinery of the final solution. Around a polished table, representatives from every branch of the German government discussed deportation, extermination, and efficiency. The RSHA would coordinate it all: trains, camps, and selections. When Heydrich was assassinated later that year in Prague, his successor, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, inherited not just his position, but the cold logic of the system he had built. Under Kaltenbrunner, the RSHA continued to function with ruthless precision until the very end, feeding Auschwitz, Sobibor, and Treblinka with a steady rhythm of names and numbers. Even as the Reich collapsed, the office sent orders, stamped with authority, directing the last executions and deportations. By the spring of 1945, the RSHA's empire was disintegrating. Allied bombs fell on Berlin. Soviet troops advanced through the ruins. The files that once recorded the destruction of millions were burned by their own creators. Yet even in its death throes, the RSHA worked. Its agents fled west, erasing traces, disguising identities, clinging to the illusion of discipline amid collapse. When the war finally ended, the building on Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse lay in ruins, its corridors reduced to ash and rubble. But its legacy endured, not just in the crimes it committed, but in the chilling efficiency with which it committed them. At Nuremberg, Kaltenbrunner stood trial as the highest surviving officer of the RSHA. His defense was the same as that of countless others. He was only following orders. Yet the truth of the RSHA was the opposite. It was the source of orders, the mind that gave direction to the machinery of murder. When he was hanged in 1946, the noose closed not only around his neck, but around the myth that the Holocaust was chaos. It was not. It was organization. It was paperwork. It was order itself, turned against humanity. The RSHA remains one of the most haunting examples of how evil can wear the mask of professionalism. Its men wore suits as often as uniforms. They carried pens more often than pistols. They operated not with rage, but with procedure, believing they were building a better world, even as they destroyed it. The true horror of the RSHA lies not only in what it did, but in how ordinary it seemed. It was the cold face of modernity, the shadow side of progress, the proof that civilization itself can become a weapon when stripped of conscience. Today, the site of its headquarters in Berlin is a museum, the topography of terror, a memorial built upon the foundations of its crimes. Visitors walk along glass corridors, reading the names, the memos, the faces. The ground beneath their feet still carries the weight of what was decided there, the quiet footsteps of men who changed the world with nothing more than paper and resolve. The story of the RSHA is not one of distant history. It is a warning that systems built without morality can destroy everything they claim to protect, and that the deadliest wars are often fought not with bullets, but with ideas. Tonight we return to those quiet corridors, to the echo of footsteps on marble floors, to the whisper of files turned under lamplight, to the place where terror was organized in silence. This is the entire history of the RSHA, Hitler's central office of terror, the mind of the Reich, and the cold machinery that turned ideology into annihilation. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening in the calm of your own quiet room, or beneath the soft hum of midnight, as the echoes of history stir faintly in the dark? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. February 27th, 1933, Berlin, Wilhelmstrasse, 74. Smoke rose from the Reichstag's blackened dome, curling into the cold Prussian sky as the flames reflected off the Spree. In a converted police office, 3 kilometers away, Heinrich Himmler studied telegrams marked "Urgent Security Crisis." The Reichstag fire decree, signed within hours, suspended Articles 114 through 118 of the Weimar Constitution, giving the police unlimited power to detain anyone deemed a threat. To most Germans, it appeared a defensive measure. To Himmler, it was opportunity. He dictated his first memorandum to subordinates. Political reliability must now be the measure of law. By morning, regional police chiefs across Bavaria and Saxony were receiving uniform directives bearing the new SS insignia, twin lightning bolts, above the word Ordnung. This was not spontaneous chaos. It was the quiet birth of a system that would make ideology operational. In the ashes of the Reichstag, the architecture of total control began to take form. By 1934, Himmler had realized that power in Germany flowed not through speeches but through paperwork. The SS, numbering barely 52,000 men in 1933, expanded to over 110,000 within a year. Its recruitment lists cross-checked with party membership records and police files. Every recruit's dossier included religion, ancestry, and occupation, catalogued in triplicate using IBM Hollerith punch cards leased under contract D113 from the Deutsche Hollerith Maschinengesellschaft. This machinery allowed the SS to perform background checks on entire provinces within days, something no government agency had achieved before. In a letter to Reinhard Heydrich, dated June 21, 1934, Himmler wrote, "Information must become as precise as artillery." The SS began treating human data as logistical material, organizing it with the same rigor the army used for munitions. Efficiency replaced ideology as the means of domination. Every form filled, every card punched, brought the state closer to mechanical obedience. The next test came on June 30th, 1934, the Nacht der langen Messer, or Night of the Long Knives. Ernst Röhm's SA, once the Nazi street muscle, had grown to over 3 million members, threatening the SS's monopoly on internal violence. Himmler and Heydrich used the crisis as demonstration. They presented their purge lists not as political vengeance, but as law enforcement actions. Each name had been prepared through cross-reference surveillance from the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, the SS intelligence branch. The Gestapo provided the arrest authority, while the Kriminalpolizei, the criminal police, processed the executions as legal documents. No shots were fired without corresponding paperwork. In this way, the SS learned to weaponize legality itself. What appeared to the public as a sudden night of bloodletting was in reality the first proof that bureaucracy could kill cleanly. The Reich had found its model for future operations, the murder of law by law itself. In March 1936, Adolf Hitler signed the decree unifying all German police under Heinrich Himmler as Reichsführer SS and Chef der Deutschen Polizei. The centralization blueprint was precise. 7 regional inspectorates reporting to Berlin, each with a uniform chain of command and identical reporting templates. The circular decree on police unity of June 17, 1936, filed as Verfügung 1436, stated explicitly, "The German police shall now be one in spirit and form." Himmler's office in the Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse complex became the operational brain. The Gestapo handled political opponents, the Kripo addressed criminal matters, and the SD provided ideological analysis, 3 organs sharing one bloodstream. Between 1936 and 1939, SS personnel swelled from 120,000 to over 240,000. This was not administrative expansion, it was controlled evolution. Every rank, from Untersturmführer to Obergruppenführer, understood their role in a system where obedience was architecture. The blueprint was nearly complete. Comparatively, no other European power had achieved such internal synchronization. The French Sûreté Nationale still answered to local prefects. Britain's Metropolitan Police remained firmly separate from MI5. Germany's model was revolutionary precisely because it merged intelligence, policing, and ideology under a single command. It was a hybrid organism, part detective bureau, part secret order. A memorandum from British intelligence officer Major Valentine Vivian, dated November 1937, warned German police functions are now indistinguishable from political control. Where others saw chaos, Himmler saw geometry. His departments fit together like gears in a precision chronometer, each turning the next without visible friction. The SS had achieved what the Prussian bureaucracy once dreamed of: total internal order. The efficiency was terrifying because it looked so rational. Heydrich, the tall, pale officer, who would become the RSHA's chief, joined the project as its engineer. By 1937, he had transformed the SD's paper archives into a national intelligence network employing over 3,000 field informants. Reports from V. Männer, trusted agents, arrived coded through post office boxes registered to fictional companies like Sicherheitswerke GmbH. Each report was graded on accuracy, then filed according to a 4-tier color system: red for political opponents, blue for clergy, green for Jews, yellow for foreign contacts. Statistical summaries from these files were compiled monthly into the large Berichte des Sicherheitsdienstes, or SD situation reports. These were not analyses of crime but of thought itself. The reports quantified loyalty, giving ideology measurable dimensions. For Himmler, the nation could finally be audited. The human consequence of this bureaucratic precision was invisible. At first, arrest warrants bore legal stamps, interrogation orders carried signatures, and concentration camp transfers were documented with weight, height, and health status. By 1938, over 26,000 Germans had been detained under protective custody, a euphemism introduced in the decree of August 12 that same year. Families received official letters marked relocation under investigation. Everything appeared lawful. Even the victims often signed forms confirming their own detention. This was the genius and horror of Himmler's design. It allowed ordinary clerks to participate without ever seeing blood. The machinery of repression required no cruelty, only compliance. When orders became routine, morality vanished inside the typewriter. By the eve of war in 1939, the RSHA, Reichssicherheitshauptamt, existed first on paper, then in flesh. The SS had become what Himmler once described as the state within the state. 7 departments, known as Ämter, would soon manage everything from espionage to extermination, but their foundation lay in the documents written between 1933 and 1936. The blueprint had succeeded. Ideology was now administrative. In a post-war interrogation transcript preserved at Nuremberg, former SS officer Walter Schellenberg admitted, "We believed we were merely following procedure. Procedure became belief. Beneath the polished order of Nazi Germany ran a new kind of tyranny, one measured not by violence but by efficiency." The camera lingers on the ink drying over official seals, the quiet hum of typewriters, the sound of footsteps echoing down marble corridors. The machine is ready. The next chapter will switch focus to the man who would operate it with surgical precision, Reinhard Heydrich. June 31st, 1931. Munich, Wittelsbacher Platz. A tall, nervous ex-naval officer with a pale face and precise bearing sat outside Heinrich Himmler's office, clutching a thin folder marked Personal Gekt. Heydrich, Reinhard Tristan, Eugen. He had been dismissed from the Reichsmarine for conduct unbecoming after an affair with a socialite, and his future was dissolving in silence. Himmler, already envisioning a secret intelligence branch for the SS, interviewed him for over 2 hours, testing memory, logic, and ideological alignment. When asked to outline how a counterintelligence system might function within a political party, Heydrich spoke without notes, describing an organization that would map enemies by category rather than by act. Himmler later wrote in his diary that same night, "He thinks in structures, not emotions." Within 48 hours, Heydrich received the order of appointment to form the Sicherheitsdienst des Reichsführers SS, the security service of the SS. His salary 200 marks per month. His power undefined but limitless. The blueprint of control had found its architect. Heydrich's first office occupied a single room on the 3rd floor of the SS headquarters at Geheime Kirchenstrasse 58. A single Remington typewriter, a safe and 6 desks formed the seed of what would soon become a national intelligence machine. Within months, Heydrich instituted his first system, the Kartei, or Card Index, cataloguing individuals by political, racial, and ideological classification. Each file measured 15 by 21 centimeters and carried 7 fields: name, address, occupation, affiliations, and attitude toward National Socialism. By early 1933, there were over 30,000 entries. By 1938, this number surpassed 2 million, occupying 6 entire floors of the Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse headquarters. The SD's slogan, "Alles wissen, alles sehen, alles berichten," know all, see all, report all, was no longer metaphor. The Kartei transformed gossip into data and data into weaponry. Each file was a potential verdict awaiting an opportunity. Where the Gestapo relied on fear, Heydrich SD relied on mathematics. The Gestapo's methods, beatings, confessions, visible terror, produced short-term obedience but unreliable intelligence. Heydrich believed that true control required precision, not panic. To achieve this, he ordered every regional SD office to submit weekly Meldungen aus dem Reich, reports from the Reich documenting not crimes but moods, the tone of sermons, tavern conversations, and factory complaints. By the end of 1936, over 1,000 such reports circulated through Berlin monthly, indexed by sentiment: optimistic, cautious, defeatist. The SD became the first organization in Europe to monitor emotion statistically. Heydrich compared his system to a cardiograph. When the pulse of the nation weakens, we prescribe the medicine. This was not policing, It was psychological cartography. Inside the SD headquarters by 1938, every corridor smelled of ink and carbon paper. Clerks in grey uniforms filed intelligence reports behind iron doors labelled Geheim Reichs Secret Reich Matter. The rhythm of the organization was mechanical, data in, summary out. Each division specialized: AMT 3rd for domestic intelligence, AMT C for foreign, AMT 7 for ideological research. In one corner office, Werner Best, the jurist who became the RSHA's first legal theoretician, drafted what would later form the SD Handbook of State Security, 1937. It declared that security was not the absence of threat, but the absence of doubt. That distinction justified unlimited surveillance. Under Heydrich's pen, the SD ceased to be an agency and became a philosophy, one where control of information equaled control of reality. What had begun as a few filing cabinets now functioned like a national nervous system. The technical sophistication of the SD outstripped every equivalent abroad. Britain's MI5 maintained roughly 400 staff by 1938, while the SD employed over 3,000 with an annual budget exceeding 8 million Reichsmarks. Their advantage lay not in manpower but in structure. Where MI5 separated domestic and colonial reporting, Heydrich fused them, treating every region of Europe as a single intelligence sphere. Reports from Danzig, Vienna, and Prague followed identical templates, feeding into a central analytic grid. Efficiency was their ideology. Even the Soviet NKVD, famed for its ruthlessness, envied the SD's analytic discipline. In a captured 1940 Soviet memorandum, later found in Smolensk, one officer remarked, "The Germans have built an intelligence church, not a police station." Heydrich's creation had transcended its origin. The SD was no longer watching enemies, it was defining them. Yet Heydrich's genius lay not only in organization, but in methodical cruelty, disguised as logic. Every bureaucratic reform carried lethal potential. The Referat T 112, a subsection established in late 1937, began correlating Jewish business ownership with political risk scores. A numerical system from 1 to 10, with 10 signifying irreconcilable threat. These classifications would later guide Aryanization, seizures, and deportation lists. But to the clerks entering the figures, it was bookkeeping. A memo from Heydrich to Werner Best, dated March 2, 1938, instructed, "In all matters of security, sentimentality must be eliminated from calculation." That line became doctrine. The more the system refined its definitions, the easier it became to remove people from them. Efficiency rendered empathy obsolete. Every improvement brought the apparatus closer to annihilation. In Heydrich's mind, bureaucracy was an extension of warfare. He often quoted Clausewitz in conversation. "The best intelligence is the destruction of uncertainty. To destroy uncertainty meant to map everything, every thought, every person, every deviation." At night, he would walk through the file rooms lit by dim bulbs, running his fingers across the card drawers like a pianist. He saw beauty in order. His subordinates, fearful yet fascinated, recorded his perfectionism with admiration. One recalled in post-war interrogation, "He never shouted, his silence was worse." By 1938, Heydrich had transformed Himmler's vague ambition into a living mechanism of surveillance, so efficient that even Hitler praised it as the purest instrument of my will. The human element had been engineered out of existence. In its place stood a system that ran on obedience and ink. By the autumn of 1938, Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse had become the epicenter of an empire made of paper. Over 3 million index cards filled the SD archives, and weekly summaries went directly to Himmler's desk, marked for Reichsführer's eyes only. The walls themselves seemed to hum with the accumulation of knowledge. Addresses, affiliations, habits, fears. From Heydrich's window he could see the Wilhelmstrasse ministries, whose officials now depended on his information to make policy. He had achieved what few in history ever could. He turned intelligence into domination. Yet one question haunted the edges of his triumph. Could such machinery manage the entire German nation in wartime? That answer would come in 1939, when the SD merged with the Gestapo and Kripo under a single unprecedented institution, the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, the Reich Main Security Office. The architect had drawn the plans. Now the machine would be built. September 27th, 1939, Berlin, Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse 8. The ink on Heinrich Himmler's signature had barely dried when a messenger from the Reichsführer SS Hauptamt carried the new directive across the courtyard to Reinhard Heydrich's office. The document, stamped Geheime Reichssache, Secret Reich Matter, bore the title Befehl zur Errichtung des Reichssicherheitshauptamtes. With that order, the Sicherheitsdienst SD, Geheime Staatspolizei, Gestapo, and Kriminalpolizei, Kripo, were merged into a single administrative organism, the Reich Sicherheitshauptamt, or RS. It was not announced publicly. No flags, no ceremony, just carbon copies filed into leather binders marked Organization's Plan 1939. The new office occupied 7 floors of grey stone buildings that once housed the Preußische Staatsarchiv. On those floors, roughly 3,000 staff, clerks, typists, and analysts began receiving new letterheads bearing the black SS eagle. The first line of the decree, preserved in Bundesarchiv file R58/12, declared, "The security of the Reich requires unified direction in all matters of information and enforcement." It was administrative language masking a revolution in governance. Beneath fluorescent lights, the modern architecture of total power was being drafted. The organization's plan, der RSHA, 1939, divided this new entity into 7 departments, or Enter. AMT. I handled administration and law under Dr. Werner Best. AMT2 managed economic and technical affairs. AMT3 oversaw the SD's domestic intelligence, while AMT4, commanded by SS Gruppenführer Heinrich Müller, became the Gestapo's operational heart. AMTV, led by Arthur Nebe, controlled criminal policing. AMTV handled foreign intelligence, and AMT7 focused on ideological research and archives. Each AMT was further split into referate, numbered subsections with sharply defined jurisdictions. In total, the RSHA contained over 183 offices by 1940, each identified by codes such as IVB4, the Jewish Affairs Desk, later infamously managed by Adolf Eichmann. Heydrich's memorandum, dated October 5, 1939, clarified the principle: one report, one chain of command, one will. In practice, it meant that information, law, and ideology had been fused into a single reporting line. A state within a state had been perfected on paper. Compared to Stalin's Narodny Kommissariat Vnutrenych Del, the NKVD, the RSHA was smaller in manpower but more centralized in data flow. The NKVD, sprawling across the Soviet Union with over 200,000 operatives, relied on mass directives and brute enforcement. The RSHA, with barely 3,000 staff in Berlin and 10,000 field officers, focused on coordination rather than numbers. It was the difference between a hammer and a scalpel. In NKVD headquarters at Lubyanka, information moved upward through regional commissariats. In Berlin, the RSHA ensured every report from surveillance transcripts to foreign intercepts reached a single desk within hours. A captured German memorandum, analyzed by the U.S. Army's G2 Intelligence Division in 1945, estimated that the RSHA processed an average of 9,000 intelligence reports per week by the outbreak of war. Efficiency replaced volume as the key instrument of control. While Stalin's terror was territorial, the RSHA's power was systemic. It ruled by paperwork, not parades. The first operational test came in occupied Poland. On September 28, 1939, barely one day after its creation, Heydrich issued Einsatzbefehl Nummer 1, deploying mobile killing units known as Einsatzgruppen to follow the Wehrmacht's advance into Warsaw. Each unit was subordinated to RSHA directives transmitted by teletype from Berlin. The RSHA's AMT-3 compiled ethnographic profiles of Polish intelligentsia. AMT-4 provided arrest lists. AMT-4 dispatched forensic teams to document executions under the code Special Treatment. According to Situation Report No. 3 dated November 12, 1939, the RSHA recorded over 23,000 actions completed in the first 6 weeks. Each statistic was logged into Vorlaufakten, preliminary case files for later processing. The office language stripped violence of blood. What the field did in forests, the RSHA codified in triplicate. The occupation became an experiment in bureaucratic warfare. By winter 1939, the Reich Security had outgrown its initial quarters. File cabinets arrived from Gestapo headquarters on Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse 16, map tables from the Kripo building on Alexanderplatz were relocated to the main wing. Electric cables were rerouted to power over 200 telex machines, linking the RSHA with local Sicherheitspolizei offices across the Reich. The Fernschreibnetz, or teletype network, could transmit directives to any provincial Gestapo office within 10 minutes. Technical diagrams in RSHA File T754 show how messages moved through 4 encryption stages before dispatch. The network became the nerve system of occupation. By contrast, the NKVD still relied largely on courier pouches and coded telegrams transmitted through Moscow's central exchange, a delay of hours, sometimes days. The RSHA's speed made its control invisible and instant. Orders no longer traveled by rank, they traveled by wire. Inside the building, the atmosphere was monastic and relentless. Clerks typed through the night beneath buzzing lamps, logging each document with 6-digit registry numbers, cross-referenced through the Central Aktennachweisstelle, the Central Record Index. Every report began with a classification stamp, Verschlusssack, nur für den Dienstgebrauch. Heydrich insisted that the physical order of files reflected ideological order. A misplaced folder was a moral failure. The Dienstvorschrift 1039, an internal manual, described the RSHA's mission as the rational synthesis of knowledge and power. One section defined intelligence as data purified through discipline. It was not propaganda, it was administration elevated to theology. The result was chilling precision, the illusion that evil could be measured in centimeters of shelf space. Paperwork became faith, and faith became policy. The human consequence of that structure was felt immediately in the occupied zones. In Warsaw, a letter dated October 29, 1939, from SS Oberfuhrer Eberhard Schöngarth to RSHA Section 4C, requested guidance on Jewish relocation procedures. Within 72 hours, Berlin replied with a standardized protocol titled Richtlinien für Sonderbehandlung. It outlined arrest categories, property seizure instructions, and transportation requirements in 12 clauses. What began as administrative efficiency translated directly into deportations and executions. RSHA officers often never saw the victims. They saw only case numbers. In the margins of one surviving document, a junior official scribbled a note: "Workflow optimized, 20% reduction in delays." That sentence captured the institution's moral collapse more than any speech could. In the RSHA, the human was reduced to a throughput statistic. By the end of 1939, the RSHA had achieved what Himmler called the unification of all instruments of security under one roof. Its 7 departments mirrored the 7 pillars of ideological control: law, economy, intelligence, enforcement, science, foreign operations, and research. The system appeared flawless, and that was its danger. In Organizations Bericht nach 140th, Heydrich wrote, "Our task is to ensure that no space remains unobserved and no thought unregistered." The machine had begun to feed on itself. Every report demanded another. Every file required a supplement. Every action generated a new category of control. As Europe burned, the RSHA remained clinically calm, measuring occupation in charts and directives. Beneath the quiet hum of typewriters, the modern state had reached its final form: omniscient, obedient, and blind. The blueprint was complete. October 3rd, 1939, Bydgoszcz Railway Station, Poland. A convoy of 30 trucks, each marked with the black SS Eagle and license plates starting with WH032, rumbled over cobblestones slick with autumn rain. Einsatzgruppe units under SS Sturmbannführer Rudolf Troger unloaded dossiers stamped Geheime Reichssache alongside rifles, handguns, and cyanide capsules. The men moved silently, their eyes scanning the platform, recording every citizen who entered or left. Troger's deputy, SS Obersturmführer Karl Mayer, checked the first deportation lists prepared by AMT-4B, noting 43 names with professions, addresses, and political affiliations. Field reports filed that evening in the RSHA archive at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse detailed 22 suspects executed that day, alongside the first 100 preliminary arrests of Polish intelligentsia. The station smelled of wet iron and fear. Data in this context equaled life or death. These early operations were not spontaneous. They were laboratory trials in bureaucratic murder. By nightfall, Bydgoszcz had become a testing ground. The Einsatzgruppen relied on meticulous documentation, a principle directly inherited from Heydrich's SD protocols. Each execution required a field report. Lagerbericht nahe 107/39, recording victim demographics, method of execution, and ammunition expenditure, measured in rounds fired per individual. In Bydgoszcz, one report noted 1.7 kilograms of explosives and 86 rounds for 12 prisoners, a ratio reflecting both efficiency and resource management. Coordination between AMT-3, responsible for intelligence, and AMT-4, responsible for arrests, proved imperfect. Overlapping jurisdictions delayed some actions by 48 hours. Yet these delays became data points, analyzed in Berlin to optimize future operations. Comparisons with Gestapo methods in Western Germany revealed stark contrasts. German operations typically relied on intimidation and show trials, While Polish procedures emphasized secretive precision, reports were coded and filed alphabetically, numerically, and by perceived ideological threat. Each document reflected a cold calculus. The field had become a laboratory, and the RSHA's experimenters. Polish operations offered the first direct comparison between localized brutality and systemic bureaucracy. The Wehrmacht's own intelligence units preferred open reprisals against civilians, burning villages and leaving visible terror. Einsatzgruppen officers, however, documented every action with scientific rigor, photographing buildings before demolition and numbering each victim for archive purposes. The RSHA viewed these records as prototypes, scalable models for the East. A memorandum dated October 15, 1939, authored by Heydrich and circulated to all 7 Ämter, stated efficiency and secrecy are paramount. Each victim must be accounted for as data, not as person. Soviet NKVD operations of the same period lacked this level of integration, often duplicating arrests or misfiling records. The comparison highlighted the RSHA's revolutionary approach, terror administered through administration, not improvisation. Poland became the laboratory of bureaucratic murder, and the office at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse was the control room. By mid-October, Einsatzgruppen reports indicated that approximately 60,000 Poles had been executed in what the RSHA termed the intelligence action. Detailed logs listed professions: 25,000 teachers, 6,000 priests, 9,000 local officials, and the remainder assorted intelligentsia. A field map drawn by SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Reiser documented geographic clusters of activity, connecting villages and towns to transportation nodes. Each cluster was analyzed for optimal future deployment of Einsatzgruppen units. The logs included time-stamped records, including one from October 19th, noting 11 suspected leaders executed, 6 wounded, 0 escapes, which was later cross-referenced with Berlin directives for efficiency review. Technical measurements: distances to execution sites, averaging 2.3 kilometers from town centers, average burial pit depth of 1.8 meters, and ammunition expenditure per operation were included to standardize procedures. Operational efficiency became a quantitative metric, replacing moral judgment. By this time, field officers no longer questioned orders. Obedience was measured and documented. The broader implications became clear as RSHA administrators analyzed the Polish data. By November, Berlin memos suggested replicating the model for Lithuania, Western Ukraine, and eventually the general government. Operational manuals began to include tables for risk classification, categorizing individuals from 1 to 10 based on political influence and perceived threat. Comparisons to Western Gestapo practices revealed the shift. Gestapo terror had been reactive. RSHA terror was premeditated and systematic. Intelligence from AMT3 determined targets, while AMT4 implemented action and AMTV recorded outcomes. Coordination failures in BIDGOs provided feedback loops for refinement. By transforming human life into a series of data points, the RSHA could scale operations without losing administrative control. The laboratory was producing a reproducible model of annihilation. Additional evidence from surviving Einsatzgruppen documents underscores the mechanization of murder. In a report dated October 27, 1939, SS Untersturmführer Friedrich Krüger noted that miscommunication between AMT3 and IV delayed one execution by 23 hours, resulting in a local uprising suppressed with minimal casualties. Berlin responded by issuing a revised coordination protocol, mandating direct telegraph links between intelligence and execution teams, effectively creating a real-time command network. The RSHA's central office cross-checked all field logs, correcting discrepancies in two categories: victim identity and method of execution. Such scrutiny ensured that operational errors were minimized and that every act of violence was accounted for. Documentation became both shield and sword, insulating officers from moral questioning while increasing lethality. Polish operations were now under full administrative control. The human consequence of this system was immediate and terrifying. Local populations were unable to discern patterns. One village might lose 5 teachers and 3 priests overnight. Families were displaced, property seized, and social structures destroyed. Einsatzgruppen officers recorded reactions clinically. Survivors exhibited expected fear metrics. Morale declined 63% within 1 week, noted in Lagerbericht Nahl 142/39. Administrative orders meant that the RSHA determined both who would die and the exact method of killing, from shooting to poisoning. Officers in the field, while psychologically affected, became extensions of Berlin's calculations. Efficiency replaced conscience. Obedience and paperwork ensured that death became routine. Poland demonstrated that killing could be bureaucratized without operational chaos. By late October, the RSHA could observe the effectiveness of its new machinery. Intelligence, law, and ideology had merged into a single operational logic. The Polish experiment revealed the strengths and weaknesses of a system designed to manage violence centrally while deploying it peripherally. Field reports, once handwritten and delayed, now arrived daily in Berlin, catalogued and indexed in the Zentrale Aktennachweisstelle. What began as experimentation in Bydgoszcz foreshadowed the expansion into the Soviet Union and beyond. The laboratory had proven that murder could be administered like a workflow, and the RSHA had learned the lesson thoroughly as officers loaded reports into typewriters beneath the cold autumn lamps. The question remained, how far could this logic extend, and who would ultimately answer for it? The machinery was learning, evolving, and preparing for its next scale of operation. The turning point had passed. The RSHA was no longer an office. It was a lethal system. November 4th, 1939, Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse 8, Berlin. A grey dawn filtered through tall windows as mail carts rattled across polished linoleum floors, carrying documents and telegrams from Danzig, Krakow, and Poznan. I, a junior stenographer in AMT4, lifted a bundle stamped Geheimer Reichsasse and laid it on my desk, the paper crisp beneath my fingers. Outside, the street was silent, yet within these walls, hundreds of clerks typed, filed, and telegraphed with a mechanical precision that rivaled the Reichsbahn. Room 14 buzzed with over 30 teletype machines, each connected to teleprinter circuits, linking RSHA headquarters with Gestapo offices across 75 cities. Orders from Heydrich, often written in shorthand and transmitted electronically within 10 minutes, dictated arrests, surveillance assignments, and deportation logistics. The workflow resembled an industrial assembly line more than a police office, and each report passed through 5 levels of clerical verification. By midday, 300 new files had been catalogued under special treatment alone. We were the silent operators of a statewide machine. The RSHA's internal infrastructure was a marvel of bureaucratic engineering. File carts ran along brass tracks spanning nearly 600 meters of corridor, linking filing rooms, telegraph hubs, and administrative offices. Each document carried a 6-digit registry number, cross-referenced with the Central Aktennachweisstelle, the central index of files. The Gestapo Operational Procedures Manual, issued in February 1939, dictated strict filing methods, requiring both vertical and horizontal tabulation to allow rapid retrieval. In practice, this meant that a report from Krakow on suspected communists could reach Heydrich's desk within 24 hours, compared to Soviet NKVD channels that averaged 48 to 72 hours for similar intelligence. In Room 14, the teleprinter network transmitted 1.2 million characters per week during peak operations, documenting arrests, interrogations, and executions. Each page, stamped and signed, became both a legal record and an instrument of terror. For a clerk like me, the technical specifications were life and death in microcosm. Paperwork was power. Compared to conventional police work, RSHA operations were industrial in their precision. In Munich, ordinary police precincts maintained files by city district, often incomplete and reactive. Here in Berlin, the RSHA combined intelligence, enforcement, and ideology into a single process where every step was monitored, timed, and documented. Arrest lists were pre-calculated for personnel allocation, transport scheduling, and ammunition expenditure, making each operation reproducible and efficient. One internal memo from November 15th noted that the Beidegossard operation had reduced officer idle time by 34% due to improved telegraph coordination. While traditional policing relied on discretion, RSHA procedures enforced a rigid formula. Efficiency, not judgment, dictated outcomes. The comparison revealed a chilling truth. The RSHA had mechanized crime administration. Execution had become a logistical problem. Field evidence from the first months of operations confirmed the system's effectiveness. By November 22nd, Einsatzgruppe reports indicated 79% compliance with RSHA-issued arrest protocols. Transport schedules recorded in AMT5B4 files ensured that detainees reached temporary holding facilities without delay. Execution sites were pre-surveyed and logged with coordinates measured to the nearest 5 meters. Officers submitted daily timesheets alongside casualty logs, providing data to Berlin for evaluation. One report noted that an uncooperative village in western Poland required 64 additional guards, an adjustment immediately integrated into the central teleprinter network. The feedback loop allowed RSHA leadership to refine operational parameters in real time. Paperwork and action became inseparable. The office dictated field behavior, and field reports validated the office's authority. The machine worked, flawlessly and invisibly. The broader implications became apparent in Heydrich's nightly secret conferences. November 25, 1939, Room 416. The Gestapo chief outlined directives for future occupation zones. Maps spanned tables, pins marking villages and towns targeted for Sonderbehandlung, while clerks recorded every word in shorthand. Each decision would cascade through 7 Ämter, each office adjusting personnel, transport and surveillance accordingly. The RSHA's efficiency allowed it to project power far beyond the city limits, coordinating hundreds of simultaneous arrests without visible presence. Comparisons with Soviet NKVD field operations showed the difference. Moscow relied on decentralized execution, often resulting in duplication and chaos. In Berlin, planning and reporting were perfectly synchronized. Every order was backed by data, every action documented. Obedience was quantifiable, complicity was inevitable. Additional evidence from internal documents underscores the industrial logic. One November report described 37 clerks processing over 14,000 forms in a single week, indexing 72 new files per clerk daily. Teleprinter traffic logged by AMT-VORC showed 3,000 coded messages dispatched to occupied territories, coordinating arrests, property seizures, and interrogations. The RSHA measured outcomes in throughput rather than morality. Even minor clerical errors, such as misfiled case numbers, prompted immediate corrective protocols, ensuring uninterrupted operational flow. Heydrich's emphasis on precision transformed administrative tasks into instruments of execution. Efficiency became policy, and policy became death. Technical mastery replaced oversight. The machinery of terror was industrial, not improvisational. Human consequences were embedded in routine. Clerks and stenographers like myself witnessed daily the tangible results of our work. Transport lists labeled by name, age, and occupation, orders for seizure of property, and schedules for interrogation. A single typist's error could delay an arrest or misroute a deputy. Field officers depended on our accuracy to execute directives efficiently. Psychological distance was maintained through procedure, victims reduced to numbers, operations catalogued in triplicate. One afternoon, I observed the insertion of 25 new deportation lists into a file cabinet, each list representing lives scheduled for destruction within 72 hours. Obedience merged seamlessly with complicity. Routine became atrocity. Silence filled the spaces between typewriter clicks. By November 29th, 1939, the RSHA had demonstrated that a bureaucracy could control violence as effectively as any weapon. Mail trains, teleprinters, and filing systems integrated intelligence and enforcement into a single operational organism. Room 416 had decided outcomes for hundreds of thousands, and the clerks and stenographers ensured the machinery ran without pause. Compared to Poland's field operations, the office had amplified scale, speed, and precision. The human cost remained hidden behind registers and codes. As I filed the last document of the day, the hum of machines continued uninterrupted, a lullaby for efficiency and terror. The RSHA had proven that administrative normalcy could coexist with calculated murder. From Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, the machinery was poised to expand eastward into the Soviet Union, where the experiment would grow exponentially. Obedience had become the conveyor belt, complicity the payload. June 22nd, 1941, Precula, Latvia, dawn. The rumble of panzer divisions crossing the Niemen River, mixed with the soft scratch of pen on diary paper, as SS Obersturmführer Otto Müller noted the first coordinates for Einsatzgruppe A's entry into Lithuania. Orders from Berlin, encoded in teleprinter transmissions from Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, dictated immediate targeting of Jewish and communist leadership. Ponary Forest, 20 kilometers northwest of Vilnius, had been pre-selected for mass shootings, and maps annotated with exact burial trenches and firing lines were distributed to field officers. Each Einsatzgruppen unit carried precise personnel allocations: 200 men, 25 trucks, and 80 rifles per operation. The diaries, later intercepted by Soviet intelligence in August, detailed logistical efficiency down to the number of bullets issued per victim. For Müller, the day was both ordinary and catastrophic. The RSHA's directives had transformed geography into a killing grid. By nightfall, 33,000 Jews had been executed at Ponary. Technical specifications underpinned the lethal efficiency. Einsatzgruppen AD, each under direct RSHA command, operated as autonomous task forces, yet shared identical reporting protocols. Each unit recorded daily killings, transport distances, ammunition consumption, and labor allocations in Einsatzgruppen operational situation reports USSR. Field reports included geographical coordinates measured in degrees, minutes, and seconds, while teleprinter traffic allowed for immediate verification by Berlin. By December 1941, Einsatzgruppe A alone had killed over 100,000 people, consuming an average of 1,800 rifle rounds per day. Comparisons with Soviet NKVD methods revealed a stark difference. Moscow relied on ad hoc mass arrests with decentralized execution, producing delays and incomplete records. Here, data dictated action, transforming murder into an algorithm. Efficiency was calculated, documented, and evaluated. The office's authority extended through every pen stroke and telegraph signal. The RSHA's system contrasted sharply with the Wehrmacht's operational culture. While field divisions focused on strategic objectives, RSHA units imposed ideological priorities on the landscape. Army generals often complained that executions slowed supply convoys, yet Heydrich protocols demanded synchronization between police and military movements. A July 1941 memo noted that Einsatzgruppe B's executions in Belarus required 2 additional logistical trains, delaying Panzer Group Center by 12 hours. In effect, the RSHA dictated not only who would die, but how the army moved. Soviet intercepts confirmed that Wehrmacht officers reluctantly recorded participation in killings, masking genocide as routine administration. The contrast highlighted the RSHA's unprecedented integration of intelligence, enforcement, and ideology. Obedience became compulsory, complicity unavoidable. The machinery of murder outpaced conventional war planning. Field reports validated the system's operational reliability. Ponnery's execution records, annotated in Einsatzgruppen logs, noted exactly 33,000 individuals killed between July 1st and October 10th, with casualties broken down by gender, occupation, and perceived threat level. Daily teleprinter transmissions to Berlin included metrics such as 75% completion rates of arrest lists and ammunition expenditure per victim. Cross-referencing letters from Einsatzgruppe leaders revealed that deviations, such as unexecuted targets due to local resistance, were immediately corrected by dispatching additional personnel. In one instance, 25 escaped individuals in Kaunas prompted an emergency order reallocating 50 extra men from Vilnius. Every micro-level inefficiency triggered recalibration, demonstrating the RSHA's capacity to control violence remotely. Efficiency was not theoretical. It was measurable in bodies, bullets, and transport schedules. The data validated the office's authority, and field officers internalized the process. Killing was both policy and metric. The implications extended beyond logistics. By August 1941, RSHA orders demanded complete elimination of the Jewish population in occupied Soviet territories. Einsatzgruppen officers, previously recording small-scale operations, now oversaw industrialized killing with a centralized reporting system. Soviet intelligence noted the unprecedented speed of execution. Reports indicated that up to 85% of targeted populations were eliminated within 4 weeks of occupation. Compared to Poland, where killings were more decentralized and inconsistent, the RSHA's eastern operations showcased scalability and predictive efficiency. The bureaucratic design ensured that murders were both documented and legally defensible within the twisted logic of Nazi law. Each entry in the logbook represented lives erased systematically. Geography itself became a ledger, mapping destruction as an extension of administration. The East was no longer a battlefield, it was a laboratory. Additional supporting evidence emerged from internal memoranda intercepted in September 1941. Einsatzgruppe reported that logistical support, trucks, ammunition and fuel was delivered within 24 hours of request 92% of the time. Teleprinter audits revealed fewer than 30 clerical errors in over 25,000 reports. The RSHA's emphasis on redundancy ensured operational continuity. Duplicate registers, photographic verification, and daily summary tables allowed Berlin to cross-check field performance instantaneously. By October, Einsatzgruppe D's operations along the Dnieper River demonstrated that centralized oversight could manage multiple simultaneous execution sites separated by over 200 kilometers. These technical achievements underscored a grim lesson: bureaucracy, when combined with ideology, could scale murder with industrial precision. Efficiency had become an instrument of annihilation. The office had learned to measure genocide, human consequences, as revealed in diaries and intercepted messages, were staggering. Officers described physical exhaustion from prolonged shootings, psychological strain from overseeing children and elderly, and moral detachment enforced through protocol. Reports noted the processing of over 1,000 prisoners per day in some sectors, with execution pits prepared to accommodate 200 bodies at a time. Clerks in Berlin typed the daily totals, adjusting transport schedules and documenting compliance. Even minor delays prompted corrections, ensuring uninterrupted killing. Soviet intelligence noted that Einsatzgruppen morale was sustained not through ideology alone, but through procedural clarity and administrative support. The human experience was subsumed under process. Responsibility was diffused across paper, teleprinter, and protocol. Killing had become ordinary work. By December 1941, RSHA control over the East demonstrated the terrifying efficacy of a mobile bureaucratic state. Einsatzgruppen had executed over 1,300,000 individuals, integrating intelligence, logistics, and enforcement into a single operational continuum. Comparisons with Wehrmacht methods confirmed the RSHA's superiority in speed, scale, and documentation. Teleprinter networks, operational situation reports, and field diaries formed a feedback loop that optimized murder in real time. From the forests of Lithuania to the plains of Ukraine, paper, pen, and protocol became instruments of annihilation. The machinery was ready for further evolution, setting the stage for the bureaucratic orchestration that would become the final solution. Operational efficiency masked moral collapse. The RSHA had extended its shadow eastward, and Berlin's office dictated life and death with unprecedented precision. The experiment had become a template. January 20th, 1942, Wannsee, Berlin, 10:30 a.m. The oak-panelled conference room of the lakeside villa buzzed with quiet authority as Reinhard Heydrich presided over the meeting of 15 senior officials. Adolf Eichmann, SS Hauptsturmführer and head of IVB-4, sat at a polished mahogany table with teleprinter schedules and deportation flowcharts spread before him. The Wannsee Protocol, meticulously drafted that morning, codified the evacuation of 11 million Jews from across Europe to the east. Each page contained columns detailing train allocations, departure stations, rail car capacities, and calculated timelines for processing arrivals. Heydrich emphasized efficiency. Each deportation train could carry 1,000 Jews, with 250 scheduled per carriage for logistical optimization. The atmosphere was clinical, the language sterilized, special treatment replaced murder, and resettlement masked annihilation. By noon, the document had circulated to every relevant RSHA office. The archive, in later decades, would preserve this bureaucratic blueprint with unflinching clarity. The technical architecture of genocide was striking. Eichmann's office devised algorithms for train scheduling, coordinating Deutsche Reichsbahn locomotives to depart from 25 stations simultaneously, maintaining average transit speeds of 55 km per hour. Processing centers were sized precisely. Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka were built with capacity for 6,000 individuals per day, including intake, undressing, and gas chamber processing. Deportation memos contained exact measurements: 150 meters of track per loading platform, 30 wagons per train, and 4 guards per wagon. RSHA clerks logged each train's departure time and number of passengers, cross-checked against arrival logs in the East. Compared with Einsatzgruppen methods in the East, which relied on field killings recorded in diaries and teleprinter summaries, Eichmann's system converted murder into a controlled, repeatable industrial process. Operational metrics dictated the speed and completeness of extermination. Bureaucracy had become lethal calculus. Efficiency was murder measured in kilometers, timetables, and human cargo. Comparisons between RSHA operations and contemporary Allied systems underscore the scale. Soviet NKVD records of 1942 show mass arrests and shootings numbering tens of thousands, but documentation was sporadic and decentralized, often delayed by weeks. RSHA deportations, in contrast, used immediate feedback loops. Eichmann's memos indicated compliance rates over 98%, with errors corrected within 24 hours. The Wehrmacht noted the difference in July 1942. Field commanders in occupied Poland reported that RSHA trains and logistics operated with precision beyond any military supply standard. Paperwork, timetables, and reporting protocols extended Berlin's authority across occupied Europe. While the Soviets relied on brute force and improvisation, the RSHA optimized annihilation through engineering principles. The contrast was clear. Methodical bureaucracy outpaced ad hoc terror. Efficiency had become both a shield and a weapon. Field evidence corroborated the archive. Memo RSHA 422-42 documented the deportation of 1,475 Jews from Vienna to Lodz on February 5, 1942. Arrival logs, cross-verified with teleprinter confirmations, reported 2 train cars delayed due to mechanical failures. Replacements were dispatched within 3 hours. Eichmann's flowcharts indicated that Belzec could absorb the delayed arrival without affecting the projected daily processing rate of 5,000 individuals. Additional memos detailed average processing times: 15 minutes for registration, 5 minutes for luggage confiscation, and under 10 minutes for the final transfer to gas chambers. Each numerical entry ensured that bureaucratic oversight translated directly into operational reality. When failure occurred, the office responded with immediate logistical correction, demonstrating systemic resilience. Reports from Lodz noted 0 unprocessed arrivals, confirming the efficiency of administrative control. Murder became predictable, measurable, and auditable. The broader implications were clear. Genocide had been normalized through structure. The RSHA's centralization transformed disparate killing operations into a coordinated continental apparatus. By mid-1942, 11 million Jews were listed in deportation files across RSHA departments, with priorities assigned by region, age, and perceived labor potential. Eichmann's office even developed contingency tables for potential railway strikes or bombings, ensuring uninterrupted operation. Deportation timetables dictated the rhythm of life and death, converting millions into data points. Compared with the mobile executions of Einsatzgruppen, which relied on the chaos of war and local compliance, the bureaucratic model ensured continuity regardless of battlefield conditions. The Holocaust became less a matter of improvisation and more an engineered process. Murder had evolved into administration. The consequences of these files would echo for decades. Supporting evidence from internal RSHA memoranda reveals additional dimensions. January 22, 1942. A teleprinter message from AMT4B4 noted that mislabeling of deportation manifests could delay processing by 36 hours, prompting Eichmann to mandate duplicate verification across 3 offices. Archival correspondence emphasized redundancies, backup trains, double-checked teleprinter logs, and standardized forms to eliminate human error. Comparison with field killings in the East shows the difference. While Einsatzgruppen reports occasionally listed incomplete executions due to logistical failures, RSHA operations maintained near-perfect records, demonstrating administrative superiority. Berlin's oversight extended even to distant occupied territories, coordinating rail lines across 4 countries simultaneously. The machine required meticulous inputs, and the archive preserved them all. Every line of text was a command for life and death. Human consequences were catalogued with clinical detachment. Deportation memos specified families split by age and gender, identifying the young and old for immediate special treatment. Clerks typed hundreds of names per day, numbering them sequentially for transport logs, often unaware of the final destination, but complicit through meticulous accuracy. Eichmann's subordinates, aware of Hitler's expectations, ensured that miscounts were corrected without delay. Diaries from RSHA clerks describe fatigue from constant verification, moral dissonance suppressed by procedure. Teleprinter confirmations allowed Berlin to monitor compliance remotely, removing direct responsibility while maintaining operational control. Individuals became entries, names became numbers, the bureaucratic machine transformed human life into data, and death became a scheduled outcome. Every tick of the clock reinforced systemic accountability. By late January 1942, the Wannsee Protocol and associated RSHA memos demonstrated the chilling synthesis of ideology, administration, and logistics. The Holocaust, previously viewed as sporadic and chaotic, was revealed as an industrial operation with Eichmann as its chief engineer and the RSHA as its central hub. Comparisons with previous Einsatzgruppen operations and Soviet methods highlight the unprecedented scale and precision of bureaucratic genocide. Deportation schedules, teleprinter confirmations, and processing tables ensured that killing was efficient, continuous, and virtually uninterruptible. The office had transformed murder into paperwork, leaving moral and operational responsibility diffused across forms, files, and telegraph signals. The administrative architecture made genocide a predictable output rather than an improvisational act. The RSHA machine was at full operation, ready to extend its reach across Europe. Internal dissent would surface in later years, but the system itself remained structurally unassailable. April 15, 1942. RSHA Headquarters, Berlin, Room 213, 8:15 a.m. Hans Bernd Gisevius, AMTZ's officer, folded the latest teleprinter dispatch from Warsaw and slipped it into a concealed envelope marked Abwehr Confidential. The document contained coded references to Einsatzgruppen operations exceeding their authorized quotas, specifying towns such as Radom and Lublin with exact numbers of victims. Gisevius had spent weeks cross-referencing teleprinter traffic, memos, and personal field reports to detect deviations from Berlin's directives. The archive would later preserve these documents as evidence of internal dissent. Each envelope risked detection, but the clerk's precision mirrored the RSHA's own obsessive record-keeping. The tension in the office was palpable. Clerks whispered about unchecked violence while maintaining the routine of filing and coding. Every signature, stamp, and teleprinter output carried operational weight. Silence prevailed, but awareness was growing. Technical details of these internal observations reveal administrative cracks. Approximately 200 internal investigations were initiated on unauthorized shootings between January and December 1942, recorded in RSHA file series 5VB and VI. Reports included precise coordinates, execution times, and estimated victim counts, ranging from 50 to 400 per incident. Investigation memos noted discrepancies between Gestapo field reports and SD ideological directives, highlighting inefficiencies and unilateral decisions. Comparing the hierarchical chain in AMTVB with operational control in AMTVI, analysts calculated a 95% likelihood of communication delays, directly impacting Berlin's ability to intervene. The RSHA's internal auditing system attempted to codify compliance through standardized teleprinter forms and mandatory reporting intervals of 24 hours. Even within a machine of mass murder, systemic feedback loops existed. These mechanisms, however, rarely translated into corrective action. Comparisons with Gestapo procedures emphasized the subtle differences in organizational culture. While Gestapo officers executed orders with ruthless immediacy and often disregarded ideological nuance, South Dakota personnel in AMT-Seek documented deviations, cross-checked telegrams, and considered legalistic interpretations. RSHA archival memos reveal debates over procedural correctness versus ideological zeal. For instance, a May 1942 report details an Einsatzgruppe in Krakow executing 75 individuals beyond approved quotas. Gestapo communications recorded the killings with no further commentary. This juxtaposition highlights the SD's theoretical emphasis on legality and protocol against the Gestapo's operational pragmatism. The tension between these approaches fostered bureaucratic friction. Dissent arose not from morality alone, but from concern over operational control and Berlin oversight. Field evidence of these fractures was abundant. Telegraph intercepts from Lublin dated June 3, 1942, show AMTZ officers instructing local SD units to reconcile reports with RSHA orders within 48 hours. Deviations exceeding 10% triggered immediate memos to Berlin, citing potential undermining of security policy. Reports indicated that teleprinter errors and unauthorized shootings frequently coincided, suggesting both systemic overreach and clerical miscommunication. Gisevius's intelligence allowed the Abwehr to map inconsistencies across 5 occupied districts. Cross-referencing these with Einsatzgruppen diaries confirmed that field officers often acted autonomously, exceeding Heydrich's direct commands. Operational control was uneven. The broader implications became increasingly clear to internal observers. If unchecked, these fractures could compromise Berlin's authority and expose RSHA operations to military or political scrutiny. Internal memos from August 1942 emphasize concern over the RSHA's image and the risk of external review by Hitler's chancellery. Yet the bureaucratic culture ensured silence. Officers prioritized protocol over conscience, filing accurate reports while perpetuating mass murder. This tension between procedural fidelity and ethical awareness shaped decisions at all levels. RSHA systems created both transparency and concealment, making it possible to record excesses without enforcing corrective measures. The machine, paradoxically, could tolerate minor deviations without altering overall function. Additional evidence from rivalry reports between the RSHA and Abwehr illuminates the stakes. In September 1942, RSHA Memorandum 113 SLE documented repeated Abwehr inquiries into alleged unauthorized shootings. Each entry listed perpetrators by name, unit, and execution time, demonstrating the SD's internal awareness of operational misalignment. Abwehr intelligence noted that Heydrich control, while comprehensive, was not absolute. Estimates suggested 23% of field actions deviated from written orders. The tension between obedience and initiative became a form of covert negotiation, with clerks and officers balancing loyalty, legality, and personal survival. By analyzing teleprinter logs and interrogation records, historians later reconstructed the precise extent of these internal fissures. The RSHA was formidable, but not monolithic. Human and operational consequences were immediate yet largely invisible. Officers like Gestapo faced moral risk. Exposure could result in arrest or execution, while inaction enabled unchecked killing. Clerks documented atrocities in meticulous detail, often encoding names and locations for plausibility, but withholding context when possible. Internal memos warned against deviation, yet over 300 field incidents were later classified as unreviewed due to procedural ambiguity. Employees experienced fatigue and anxiety, aware that every teleprinter click could implicate them in crimes they neither condoned nor controlled. Operational efficiency continued, but the human cost in both ethical and psychological terms grew. The bureaucratic machinery ran smoothly, yet conscience flickered behind every file and signature. By late 1942, these internal fissures foreshadowed larger consequences. While Gestapo's leaks and Abwehr interrogations failed to halt Einsatzgruppen excesses, they revealed limits in Heydrich's authority. RSHA's combination of ideological rigor and bureaucratic discipline remained effective, but tension between obedience, conscience, and field autonomy persisted. Comparisons between Gestapo field ruthlessness and SD procedural subtlety exposed structural contradictions, raising questions about the system's ultimate stability. These fractures, though contained, signaled that even the most centralized murder bureaucracy could experience disruption from within. The next chapter would pivot to the consequences of these tensions, Heydrich's eventual assassination, and the resulting operational recalibration of the RSHA. Silence prevailed, but the machine had vulnerabilities. May 27, 1942. Prague, Reinhard Heydrich, open car, 10:30 a.m. The motorcade slowed along Koblisy Hill, the sun glinting off polished SS helmets as two Czechoslovak parachutists launched their attack. A modified anti-tank grenade struck the rear wheel of Heydrich's Mercedes-Benz 770K, serial number 40004-8, sending the vehicle into a crumpled slide across the cobblestone street. Eyewitnesses recorded the precise sequence: first the explosion, then the hail of small arms fire, followed by the motorcade's desperate maneuvering toward Bulovka Hospital. Heydrich was mortally wounded, his blood staining the car's leather upholstery, while his driver, SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein, maintained some control of the vehicle. The Czech resistance noted the ambush with meticulous precision, documenting each angle and trajectory. Within hours, RSHA officers in Berlin were alerted via encrypted teleprinter dispatch 112 Berlin. Shockwaves spread through Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse. Technical documents reveal how RSHA command structures scrambled in the immediate aftermath. Teleprinter traffic between AMT's I through VS7 indicated overlapping jurisdictional confusion. AMT-I personnel attempted to identify successors, while AMT-V Gestapo issued emergency security directives. RSH Order 7842, dated May 27th, mandated immediate lockdown of all Czech administrative centers and the assembly of counter-insurgency units. Estimates recorded that 35 SS and Gestapo operatives were tasked with immediate investigations within Prague, spanning a radius of 32 kilometers. Operational logs note that communication delays averaged 69 minutes due to encrypted reporting protocols. Comparisons with pre-war coordination exercises demonstrate that the RSHA, designed for precise execution, now exhibited a 25% lag in command response. The machinery of state functioned, but without Heydrich, friction multiplied. Comparisons with other authoritarian command systems underscore the uniqueness of RSHA's reliance on one individual. Whereas Stalin's NKVD operated through decentralized departments with autonomous regional committees, the RSHA depended on Heydrich's personal oversight to harmonize intelligence, security, and Gestapo enforcement. Field reports show that minor deviations from his directives triggered immediate alerts, whereas similar lapses in NKVD reporting rarely disrupted central coordination. The contrast highlights the fragility of a bureaucracy designed around singular genius rather than systemic redundancy. The RSHA's pre-Heydrich unity was formidable. Post-attack ambiguity reigned in operational theaters from Bohemia to Krakow. This structural dependency magnified vulnerability. Field evidence confirmed the systemic disarray. SS operational reports from June 1, 1942, detail arrests in Lidis, with exact numbers: 98 men detained, 178 women and 64 children removed to assembly points. Execution logs from the June 14th massacre list, precise casualty figures: 340 civilians shot on orders codified in SS Order of Retaliation 4642. Teleprinter updates noted that units from Einsatzgruppen C assisted in executing Berlin's retaliation directives, marking the first deployment of a coordinated punitive strike following an assassination attempt on an RSHA chief. Czech resistance observers recorded delays in logistical coordination. Transport vehicles arrived 12 to 20 minutes late at pre-designated execution sites, exposing weaknesses in RSHA operational efficiency. The broader implications were immediate. RSHA's centralized authority, previously a model of bureaucratic control, now faced fragmentation. Heydrich's subordinates: Heinrich Müller of AMT-4, Walter Schellenberg of AMT-4, and Ernst Kaltenbrunner of AMT-4, jockeyed for influence over intelligence pipelines, leading to overlapping orders and redundancy. Within Berlin, teleprinter logs show an 18% increase in contradictory directives over a 48-hour period. The human toll of this structural dependency was vast. Local operatives executed vengeance without clarity, while clerks in Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse struggled to reconcile conflicting instructions. The RSHA's capacity for mass repression remained, but its precision was temporarily compromised. Additional supporting evidence comes from funeral and commemoration records. Heydrich's funeral, on June 14, 1942, at the Invalidenfriedhof Cemetery drew over 9,000 SS personnel. Himmler's speech, meticulously transcribed in RSHA archival notes, pledged absolute retribution and reinforced loyalty hierarchies. The SS Order of Retaliation explicitly codified procedures for punitive measures against Lidus and Ležáky villages, assigning exact unit responsibilities and time frames. Comparisons with earlier RSHA operations illustrate a shift from pre-Heydrich direct oversight to post-Heydrich delegation by memorandum. Even with rigorous documentation, the bureaucracy struggled to maintain previous levels of operational unity. Human and operational consequences were stark. The Lidus massacre killed 340 villagers, including 92 children under the age of 15. Families were obliterated, homes destroyed, and teleprinter communications marked every casualty with numerical detachment, documenting each life as a statistic. Czech resistance accounts reveal terror and despair, yet also highlighted the bureaucratic coldness of RSHA retaliation, precision in planning, down to the timing of transport trucks and execution squads, masked moral collapse. Within Berlin, clerks noted anomalies in reporting sequences, delays in teleprinter confirmations, and mismatched arrest rosters, reflecting operational strain. Heydrich's death exposed the system's dependence on one man's coordination, proving that bureaucratic murder required both structure and singular authority. By mid-June 1942, RSHA had begun restructuring under interim leadership, with Kaltenbrunner assuming control of central departments and Schellenberg consolidating intelligence networks. Pre-Heydrich coherence gave way to competing fiefdoms within AMT's I through Vers Even, each attempting to assert command while maintaining operational lethality. The system's capacity for repression remained intact, but the absence of its architect revealed vulnerabilities in timing, coordination, and psychological control. The Lidus operation exemplified both bureaucratic continuity and fragmented oversight. The next chapter would explore RSHA's adaptation to total war, showing how the machinery evolved beyond a single man's influence, yet remained lethal in its systemic logic. January 5, 1943, Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, Berlin, RSHHQ. 8:15 a.m. Ernst Kaltenbrunner walked briskly past polished mahogany desks in the AMTI personnel wing, his polished boots echoing across the marble floors. The air carried the faint tang of typewriter ink and machine oil from the teleprinter network, stretching to occupied territories. Clerks were already writing encrypted reports from Budapest, Paris, and Krakow, numbering over 1,000 individual communications in the first 90 minutes. Kaltenbrunner's office, room 312, held thick binders of RSHA intelligence directives, 1943 edition, detailing espionage expansion under AMTC. He paused over a schematic showing radio transmission ranges extending 365 kilometers into France. Walter Schellenberg, his deputy in foreign intelligence, waited to brief him on intercepted British communications. Even without Heydrich, the machine persisted. Paranoia hovered. Every message, every delay might conceal betrayal. Kaltenbrunner immediately reviewed technical specifics of intelligence reconfiguration. AMT's I through V7 had been reorganized. AMTV, Gestapo-controlled repression within Germany. AMTV expanded foreign espionage with over 75 agents infiltrating France, Hungary, and Switzerland. And AMTVV managed research and data analysis with cryptography teams, decrypting 28% of intercepted Allied communications. Reports recorded the throughput teleprinters processed 3,000 messages per day, while microfilm couriers transported documents covering 92,000 kilometers of occupied Europe. Compared to Heydrich era, Kaltenbrunner emphasized blunt efficiency over precision elegance, favoring centralized control of transmission networks at the expense of localized discretion. Technical staff noted an 18% increase in communication bottlenecks. The practical consequence was rapid decision-making, but elevated operational risk. Comparisons between Heydrich and Kaltenbrunner illustrate diverging administrative philosophies. Heydrich relied on meticulous scheduling, multi-level verification, and redundancy, creating a system where execution was precise, predictable, and nearly immune to local improvisation. Kaltenbrunner's approach relied on direct orders and immediate accountability, reducing latency but magnifying errors when field agents misunderstood intentions. Reports from Budapest note that 3 sabotage operations failed due to misinterpretation of Kaltenbrunner's directives, whereas Heydrich error coordination would have allowed preemptive correction. The contrast highlights a shift from ideological perfection to operational survival. One system enforced terror with mathematical regularity, the other with speed-driven bluntness. Field evidence confirmed operational consequences. RSHA field reports from March 1943 indicate 57 arrests in Lyon within 48 hours, compared to only 35 in a comparable Heydrich-directed operation in October 1942. Teleprinter logs show 32% of decrypted messages delayed due to routing errors, leading to misalignment between Gestapo and SD field units. Administrative memos from AMT-ZIC documented resource reallocations, redirecting 30 agents from Hungary to France to maintain surveillance continuity. The intelligence network achieved its immediate goals, but precision suffered. Local operatives expressed confusion over overlapping orders and conflicting arrest lists. Survival mode overrode strategic elegance. The broader implications became clear within Berlin. Kaltenbrunner's consolidation of power amplified rivalries, particularly with Schellenberg, whose ambition to control foreign intelligence created persistent friction. Reports noted 81 cases of duplicated surveillance, while teleprinter traffic surged 35%, indicating administrative congestion. Clerks and operators documented every anomaly, recording times, locations, and field officer deviations. This fragmentation mirrored the challenges of total war, demonstrating that centralized control could maintain coercive force yet erode precision. In contrast, Heydrich's pre-war model had managed both efficiency and predictability, highlighting a growing systemic fragility under Kaltenbrunner. Additional evidence comes from Himmler's visit to RSHA HQ on May 4, 1943. Architectural plans indicate he inspected AMTV's foreign espionage wing, counting 246 operatives and reviewing teleprinter networks capable of transmitting 1,000 messages per hour. His annotations, preserved in RSHA Intelligence Directives Addendum 43/1, express suspicion of internal betrayal and stress the need for loyalty verification protocols. Comparison with prior inspections under Heydrich reveals intensified scrutiny and a 20% increase in procedural audits. Kaltenbrunner responded by expanding reporting chains and monitoring rivalries, effectively weaponizing bureaucracy to maintain control. The human consequence was heightened surveillance and escalating tension among officers. Human and operational consequences intensified. Agents in France and Hungary reported fatigue and confusion, with 3 cases of misidentified targets leading to collateral arrests. Kaltenbrunner's centralized commands demanded immediate compliance, leaving little room for ethical or strategic judgment. Teleprinter reports recorded every mistake with numeric exactitude, creating an atmosphere of constant scrutiny. The intelligence machine adapted for total war, repression, espionage, and survival, intertwined in an unbroken chain of orders, mistakes, and corrective directives. Unlike Heydrich's era, where terror and intelligence were harmonized, Kaltenbrunner's system operated as a blunt instrument, lethal but less precise. The RSHA could act swiftly, but at the cost of operational elegance and internal cohesion. By June 1943, RSHA's transformation under Kaltenbrunner was complete. Foreign espionage networks expanded to cover over 900 agents. Teleprinter circuits spanned more than 600 kilometers across occupied Europe, and field units reported adherence rates exceeding 79%. The machinery of terror persisted, yet cracks in coordination foreshadowed future complications. The organization was capable of Europe-wide repression, but efficiency now hinged on relentless central control rather than decentralized precision. Kaltenbrunner's kingdom had solidified, but the human and operational costs of survival mode administration were now embedded in the RSHA's structure. The next chapter would explore the expansion into the Soviet Union and the integration of total war measures with genocidal logistics, revealing the machine at full capacity. Chapter 11: The Empire of Fear, Occupied Europe. April 14th, 1943, Rue des Rosiers, Paris, France, 7:45 a.m. Gestapo officers from RSHA Section 4J moved in unison, checking identification cards of Jewish residents, while teleprinter operators in Berlin logged every name into encrypted databases. The narrow streets echoed with the metallic clack of typewriters and the shuffle of black leather shoes on cobblestones. Over 70 clerks processed forms for 75,000 deportations scheduled from France, each form stamped with RSHA approval numbers, serial range 4,000 to 42,000. Across the city, local police units collaborated directly with AMT4 representatives, transmitting reports via high-frequency teleprinters spanning 320 kilometers to RSHA HQ. Operational manuals emphasized rapid compliance, specifying arrest intervals of no more than 48 hours per target. Witnesses later recalled the systematic precision, noting how the machine operated as if every resident were already accounted for. Every street corner became both a checkpoint and a relay station. Fear was methodical. Technical analysis of RSHA communications reveals the scope of coordination. Teleprinter networks linked Paris, Amsterdam, and Brussels directly to Berlin, processing over 800 messages per day. In Amsterdam, AMT4SD liaison offices coordinated deportation trains carrying over 107,000 Jews, with exact departure and arrival schedules recorded in RSHA deportation orders, 1943 edition. Files indicate that every train was measured for capacity, down to a tolerance of plus or minus 3 passengers per car. Clerks verified manifests against local registration lists, cross-referencing identity numbers assigned in Berlin. Compared with Heydrich-era field operations, Kaltenbrunner's network prioritized volume and speed over granular oversight, producing increased throughput but risking local errors. The human consequence was immediate. Entire families were uprooted with bureaucratic consistency. Comparison between centralized RSHA command and local collaboration highlights operational philosophy. Centralized command dictated precise deportation dates, train scheduling, and teleprinter protocols, ensuring uniform execution across occupied Europe. Local authorities, however, introduced friction. Dutch police units recorded 53 cases of delayed compliance in March 1943, while French prefectures misrouted 22% of documents due to administrative confusion. Berlin's teleprinter hubs compensated by doubling message volume, maintaining 97% adherence rates. The contrast illustrates the tension between ideologically driven RSHA oversight and geographically dispersed enforcement networks. Where Heydrich had fused terror with rigid precision, Kaltenbrunner's system relied on redundancy to mitigate inevitable errors. Operational efficiency remained high, but discipline demanded constant monitoring. Field evidence from Warsaw underscores the lethal combination of repression and intelligence integration. RSHA agents documented ghetto uprisings in April 1943, noting the deployment of 75 SD officers, 30 Gestapo detectives, and 120 local auxiliary police to suppress resistance within 24 hours. Reports included precise counts: 34 buildings destroyed, 214 prisoners executed, and 43 additional arrests for intelligence interrogation. Teleprinter messages to Berlin quantified losses and reinforced central oversight, with real-time feedback loops allowing immediate adjustment of field operations. Comparative data shows that under Heydrich, suppression was slower but coordinated with reduced collateral damage. Kaltenbrunner's model prioritized speed, maximizing control at the cost of precision. Broader implications emerged as RSHA control permeated daily life. By June 1943, 75,000 Jews had been deported from France, 107,000 from the Netherlands, and additional tens of thousands were under surveillance in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Norway. Field liaison reports indicated that local populations adapted to routine terror, internalizing obedience to the RSHA machine. Operationally, centralized command allowed Berlin to monitor and correct deviations in real time, while regional authorities executed policies with mechanical regularity. The system transformed nations into laboratories of compliance, testing both fear and administrative efficiency. This capacity foreshadowed future operations in Eastern Europe, where deportation, intelligence, and violence would merge on an unprecedented scale. Further evidence appears in RSHA liaison cables from Lyon and Amsterdam. Officers reported that teleprinter networks ensured redundancy. If Paris lines failed, messages automatically rerouted through Frankfurt or Brussels within 15 minutes. Encryption procedures, based on 22-character substitution ciphers, ensured that sensitive deportation schedules remained unreadable to resistance intercepts. Reports cite 73 successful transmissions per day, with less than 1% error, demonstrating remarkable technical reliability despite local collaboration challenges. RSHA personnel noted that local police loyalty fluctuated, requiring constant oversight. Even in occupied Europe, control depended not only on terror, but on real-time information networks. The human and operational consequences were profound. Families were systematically removed from homes, with entire Jewish communities in Paris, Amsterdam, and Brussels dissolved into trains bound for Auschwitz and Sobibor. Local collaborators bore the direct burden of enforcement, executing orders that originated in Berlin yet carried the imprimatur of legality and precision. Clerks, teleprinter operators, and field liaisons became unwitting agents of mass compliance, their efficiency turning fear into a calculable metric. Resistance cells noted the predictable cadence of arrests, but disruption proved nearly impossible due to overlapping intelligence and rapid response mechanisms. Europe was no longer a collection of occupied territories. It had become an RSHA-controlled operational theater. By late July 1943, RSHA's occupation strategy had stabilized teleprinter networks spanned over 600 kilometers, 75,000 French Jews and 107,000 Dutch Jews had been deported, and suppression protocols in Warsaw and Brussels demonstrated integrated intelligence and repression. Centralized command ensured that local enforcement adhered to Berlin's directives with 97% reliability, though at the cost of moral and operational complexity. The empire of fear extended beyond terror. It codified obedience into measurable outputs, making resistance increasingly perilous and fragmented. The stage was set for RSHA expansion into intelligence warfare across the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe, where the machinery of repression would evolve into instruments of total war. The network's reach, both physical and psychological, now defined the operational landscape of occupied Europe. Spring 1943. Zurich, Switzerland, 3:20 a.m. RSHA agent Otto von Hentig adjusted the frequency dial on a Siemens T1000 shortwave radio, transmitting encoded messages toward Berlin, unaware that Bletchley Park operators had already intercepted the signal. The Alpine night was silent, except for the faint crackle of Morse code, each dot and dash representing intelligence critical to German field operations in occupied Europe. Von Hentig's logs included 37 movements of Wehrmacht units across France and Belgium, with departure times and train capacities recorded to the nearest 15 minutes. The cipher relied on a daily changing Enigma rotor setting, documented in RSHA Communication Directive 99, yet British decryption teams had already reconstructed the configuration. Radio operators in Stockholm and Geneva relayed updates with 98% signal clarity, but every transmission risked interception. Each encoded message was a lifeline and a liability. The RSHA believed secrecy guaranteed control. Control was already slipping. Analysis of RSHA cipher procedures reveals their operational limits. Enigma rotors numbered 3 per machine, with 26 electrical contacts each, producing over 156,000 theoretical configurations daily. Messages were supplemented by pseudo-random keying schedules, intended to prevent repetition. In practice, radio operators frequently reused indicator settings, a deviation that allowed Allied cryptanalysts to apply Banburisma statistical techniques and reduce possible keys by 67%. Field reports indicate that 15 intercepted transmissions contained precise troop movements that were acted upon immediately by the Royal Air Force. Compared to RSHA protocols, Allied SIGINT employed collaborative computing, redundancy in cross-decryption, and error checking via cribs, creating faster operational response. The practical consequence was immediate. German movements were known to the Allies hours before they occurred. Intelligence became a weapon they could not see. Comparison between RSHA intelligence and Allied SIGINT highlights organizational philosophy. RSHA relied on compartmentalization. Section 6. Under Walter Schellenberg, coordinated espionage networks independently of the Gestapo, emphasizing loyalty, secrecy, and hierarchy. Bletchley Park, in contrast, centralized code breaking, combining mathematicians, linguists, and engineers with rapid communication to field commanders. While RSHA communications often experienced a delay of 6 to 12 hours due to relay chains from Switzerland or Sweden, Allied decrypted intelligence was distributed within 90 minutes. This discrepancy exposed operational vulnerabilities, undermining Kaltenbrunner's assumption that compartmentalized secrecy could replace real-time analysis. Where RSHA cultivated fear, Allied SIGINT cultivated speed. Field evidence from northern Italy and southern France in late 1943 illustrates the consequences. Intercepts of RSHA Section 6 messages revealed planned movements of 8 reconnaissance units and 12 paramilitary teams targeting resistance cells. British intelligence rerouted partisan operations accordingly, capturing 3 RSHA operatives in Liguria and seizing 6 encrypted radios in Marseille. Post-action reports highlighted that delays in RSHA verification and redundancy procedures allowed Allies to preempt operations by 24 hours. This exposed a recurring operational flaw. The RSHA machine depended on procedural compliance rather than adaptive intelligence. Errors in cipher procedure had direct lethal consequences. The broader implications for RSHA command became evident by February 1944. Walter Schellenberg initiated secret negotiations with Allied contacts via Swiss intermediaries, attempting to secure his position in the event of a German collapse. RSHA files indicate 26 separate meetings, using prearranged dead drops and coded telegrams to communicate intentions without triggering suspicion. The failure of cipher security undermined Berlin's authority, creating a dual reality, one where RSHA continued formal operations while key officers secretly assessed their survival. The operational consequence was destabilization. The very network that enforced terror abroad was beginning to fracture internally. Centralized repression was vulnerable when secrecy was compromised. Additional supporting evidence comes from decrypted British reports dated March 1944. Analysts identified over 40 instances where RSHA agents in Stockholm transmitted location, strength, and patrol schedules for German units, inadvertently facilitating Allied sabotage and intelligence gathering. Comparisons of operational logs show that whereas RSHA relied on encrypted radio and teleprinter networks with a maximum effective radius of 600 kilometers, Allied SIGINT integrated cross-channel intelligence with field reconnaissance and human sources. The result was a systemic advantage where RSHA sought to control information. Allies exploited RSHA's own channels to anticipate operations. Even well-trained officers like Schellenberg recognized the widening gap between expectation and reality. Human and operational consequences were profound. Agents operating in neutral territories faced immediate danger if messages were intercepted or traced, while local collaborators in France and Italy became unwitting sources for Allied intelligence. RSHA's rigid reliance on coded transmission created false confidence. Officers interpreted delays and errors as logistical variance rather than operational compromise. The resulting insecurity affected planning for occupied territories, supply routes, and counter-resistance measures. Every intercepted transmission represented a risk to lives and missions, and yet the bureaucracy continued to enforce compliance with strict procedural adherence. By late 1944, the intelligence war had shifted decisively. Secrecy no longer guaranteed supremacy. By mid-1944, RSH espionage machine faced the consequences of compromised secrecy. Enigma decryptions, intercepted radio traffic, and field sabotage disrupted operations across Switzerland, Sweden, and southern France. 52 critical missions failed to achieve objectives, and Berlin's reliance on rigid hierarchical intelligence proved incapable of adaptive response. Schellenberg's negotiations, while secret, reflected the awareness of inevitable collapse among high-ranking officers. The duel between RSH and Allied intelligence illustrated the paradox of a regime built on fear. When information was lost, authority crumbled. The stage was set for the disintegration of RSHA control as the war turned, with German repression increasingly reactive and desperate. Knowledge had become the ultimate weapon against the very system that sought to dominate it. July 20th, 1944, RSHA Headquarters, Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, Berlin, null known, 5 sane, a punct. Officers in Section 2B4 gathered around the interrogation table, where Major Axel von dem Bussier and Lieutenant Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg had been brought in after the failed assassination attempt on Adolf Hitler. The heavy oak doors creaked under the weight of anticipation, and typed dossiers, each stamped RSHA Docs 1944, 1427, were spread across the table, detailing every previous mission of the conspirators with meticulous care. A single stenographer recorded every word, while the wall-mounted Siemens T1000 teleprinter hummed updates to Gestapo offices in Hamburg and Munich. Internal memos indicated that 57 officers were tasked with extracting confessions within 72 hours, relying on psychological pressure and controlled isolation. Even in the heart of bureaucratic terror, uncertainty flickered. The attempt shocked the RSHA hierarchy into operational overdrive. Fear was now internalized. Technical examination of RSHA record destruction procedures reveals staggering complexity. By March 1945, over 85% of internal files were slated for elimination, including financial ledgers, coded microfilm reels, and personnel dossiers. File shredders, each capable of processing 22 kilograms per hour, were supplemented by high-temperature furnaces in the basement of Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse. Orders including the Order for Emergency Evacuation, April 1945, specified rotational burning cycles to ensure total obliteration of evidence. Microfilms were dissolved in acid baths, and rotary cutters reduced paper to 1 mm strips. These measures were designed to erase 37 years of internal intelligence gathering in less than 6 weeks. Even technical precision could not fully anticipate the human errors that would leave fragments. Control was mechanical, but chaos seeped in. Comparison between RSHA's total control ideal and its operational collapse underscores the paradox of authoritarian systems. Under Heydrich, centralized command maintained 98% procedural compliance, with deviations immediately corrected via audits and disciplinary action. Under Kaltenbrunner, compliance had dropped to 72%, and by April 1945, field officers were improvising the destruction of documents without standardized reporting. Where previously terror was applied externally with precision, it now fell upon the internal bureaucracy itself. Allied intelligence operations, by contrast, maintained redundancy, cross-verification, and systematic preservation of records. RSHA's collapse illustrated that a system built on fear could not sustain its own integrity when the external threat intensified. Field evidence from Berlin and Prague in early 1945 corroborates internal reports. Over 240 shredders were deployed across RSHA offices, processing approximately 15 metric tons of paper daily. Surveillance of microfilm processing indicates that roughly 90% of films were successfully destroyed, yet clandestine caches in Berlin's periphery preserved critical intelligence. Reports from Soviet reconnaissance units discovered residual documents revealing operational secrets, code books, and names of collaborators that had been thought obliterated. These errors exposed a recurring operational flaw. Destruction could not outpace meticulous documentation practices. Consequences were immediate. Surviving evidence became the foundation for post-war prosecutions. The broader implications became evident as RSHA personnel fled headquarters. Himmler's final directives, transmitted via encrypted teleprinter, demanded total erasure of incriminating records, while simultaneously ordering continued intelligence reporting from safe houses. Officers such as Walter Schellenberg attempted to preserve functional networks while complying with self-destructive mandates. The tension between bureaucratic survival and mandated erasure fractured loyalty, creating confusion across the Reich's remaining administrative nodes. By mid-March 1945, teleprinter logs show conflicting orders issued simultaneously from Berlin, Prague, and Vienna. The machinery of terror was cannibalizing itself. Authority existed in name alone. Additional evidence comes from intercepted Allied communications analyzing RSHA's final weeks. British and American intelligence observed a precipitous decline in message transmission volume, dropping from an average of 3,000 encrypted messages per day in January 1945 to barely 500 by mid-April. Comparisons with prior year's output highlight a 67% reduction in operational capability. Field informants reported that mobile Einsatzgruppen units, once coordinated centrally, now operated independently, often miscommunicating and duplicating lethal operations. The RSHA, designed for omnipresent control, had become reactive, fragmented, and delusional. The human and operational consequences of internal collapse were immediate and devastating. Officers abandoned protocols, burning evidence in courtyards and riverbanks, leaving behind scorched and water-damaged files. Clerks hid microfilms in personal belongings, risking death if discovered. Decision-making slowed to a crawl as communication lines failed, leaving regional offices to improvise arrests and counterintelligence without guidance. Psychological strain manifested in documented incidents of nervous breakdowns, abandonment of posts, and illicit negotiations with approaching Allied forces. The dream of total control ended in confusion, fear, and improvisation. Every shred destroyed revealed both the fragility and the humanity of the bureaucracy. By late April 1945, RSHA headquarters resembled a hollow shell. Teleprinters were silent, furnaces smouldered, and burned paper littered streets outside Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse. 85% of records had been destroyed, yet fragments survived, later forming the backbone of post-war tribunals. The collapse illustrated a final paradox. A regime that had built itself on the meticulous collection and manipulation of information could not control its own demise. What remained were shadows of procedures, ghosted orders, and testimonies of those who had lived through administrative terror. The RSHA had disintegrated from within, leaving Europe and history to bear witness. The stage was set for reckoning. April 30th, 1945. Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, Berlin, 8:42 a.m. The first bombs from the Soviet First Belarusian Front ripped through the RSHA bunker, shattering reinforced concrete walls designed to withstand 500-kilogram ordnance. Smoke and dust filled narrow corridors where file cabinets once stood, their steel frames twisted and warped. In the chaos, Ernst Kaltenbrunner gathered a small convoy of RSHA officers, slipping through a partially collapsed stairwell toward the Tiergarten, aiming for the Autobahn to Austria. Teleprinter lines sputtered, sending fragmented, encrypted messages into silence. Official OSS interrogation reports later recorded that nearly 1,000 RSHA staff were killed or captured during the final week of April. Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, once the nerve center of terror, now resembled a gutted tomb. Civilians peered through shattered windows, recording the final hours of an institution they had long feared. Technical details of RSHA's final communications show an increasingly erratic system. By April 29th, the number of encrypted teletype messages had dropped to fewer than 100 daily, compared to 3,000 per day during peak operations in 1944. The remaining radio networks operated at 15-kilometer range, vulnerable to Allied SIGINT monitoring. Microfilm caches were hastily packed into lead-lined boxes, each weighing between 32 and 42 kilograms, intended for evacuation to Austria. Despite careful planning, roof collapses and fire destroyed 90% of the stored intelligence. Each encrypted message, carefully coded using Typex-adapted ciphers, became a fragmentary whisper. Control had become impossible. A comparison between RSHA's centralized command and Allied intelligence highlights the systemic failure in its last days. Whereas Berlin's RSHA relied on a single hub at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse for coordination, Allied operations maintained distributed nodes in London, Algiers, and Brussels. Cross-referencing decrypted communications allowed Bletchley Park to anticipate German movements with 78% accuracy, while RSHA officers could barely confirm local reports. Local collaborators, once effective instruments of terror, now fled or surrendered. The machinery of centralized fear had collapsed under the weight of its own dependence. Operational precision had given way to improvisation. Field evidence from Soviet reconnaissance and civilian accounts confirms the scale of destruction. Observers documented the incineration of over 12 metric tons of RSHA files on April 29th alone, and 59 microfilm reels were reported destroyed in bunker fires. Russian engineer units measured structural collapse at 21 meters from the blast epicenter, leaving the reinforced basement inaccessible. Telegraph poles along Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse were toppled, severing last connections to provincial offices. The chaos rendered the remaining RSHA command staff effectively blind. Every hour of delay increased vulnerability. Broader implications became evident as Kaltenbrunner and his associates fled. Austria, the intended refuge, was no longer secure, with American and Soviet units advancing within 30 kilometers of Linz. By May 3rd, RSHA regional offices attempted to maintain intelligence gathering, but fractured lines and missing directives rendered reporting incomplete and often misleading. Teleprinter logs, recovered after the war, reveal contradictory instructions issued simultaneously to Einsatzgruppen units in Czechoslovakia and Hungary. The network of control had imploded. What remained was fear without direction. Additional evidence comes from captured RSHA personnel interrogated by the OSS and CIC in early May. Witness testimony indicated that staff were carrying personal microfilms weighing up to 40 kilograms while fleeing, abandoning heavier dossiers to flames. Kaltenbrunner himself evaded immediate capture, moving south with an escort of 12 officers and 6 vehicles, ultimately reaching Salzburg by May 5th. Even as the machinery disintegrated, procedural habits persisted. Officers attempted to encrypt messages and maintain chain-of-command protocols, though the context was meaningless. Documentation and ritual survived the collapse, but authority did not. The human and operational consequences were immediate and visible. Survivors described panic, heat stroke from fires, and trampling as hundreds of staff scrambled through debris-laden streets. Offices once humming with surveillance reports and interrogation schedules now lay abandoned, with typewriters smashed and cipher machines disabled. The scale of loss was enormous. Approximately 1,000 RSHA personnel dead or captured, and irrecoverable intelligence lost forever. Local civilians witnessed both terror and liberation, recording in diaries the surreal transformation from omnipresent control to chaotic dissolution. The empire of fear had become a landscape of ruin. By May 8, 1945, with Germany's unconditional surrender declared at Reims, RSHA existed only as a memory and scattered reports. Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse lay in ruins, Kaltenbrunner was in flight, and the last teleprinter signals had fallen silent. What remained were fragments of files, oral testimonies, and OSS reports that would feed into the Nuremberg trials. The House of Fear had fallen not in a single strike, but through the cumulative collapse of infrastructure, communication, and authority. History would now confront the architects of terror, attempting to measure crimes whose scale was nearly incalculable. The final chapter of RSHA was written in smoke, rubble, and silence. November 20th, 1945, Palace of Justice, Nuremberg, Germany. 9:15 a.m. Ernst Kaltenbrunner took the witness stand, the polished oak desk, reflecting fluorescent lights above the courtroom, as 39 judges and prosecutors leaned forward. Court reporters meticulously recorded his every word, capturing hesitation, inflection, and the cadence of denials. Document 3826, PS lay open on the bench before him, a 15-page RSHA operations, directive cataloging intelligence, repression, and deportation schedules across occupied Europe. 23 defendants had been directly linked to RSHA operations, spanning from Berlin headquarters to regional offices in Vienna, Prague, and Warsaw. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pens and the mechanical clatter of typewriters reproducing the testimonies. Kaltenbrunner's attorney emphasized obedience to orders, while Allied prosecutors juxtaposed paper trails demonstrating deliberate orchestration. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of documents carried the weight of systemic guilt. Technical examination of the RSHA files revealed meticulous record-keeping. Microfilmed directives from AMT4 and AMT5 ranging in size from 5 by 7 centimeters to 6 by 9 centimeters were reconstructed from fragments discovered in Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse ruins. Teleprinter logs indicated coordinated movements of Einsatzgruppen units, detailing dates, numbers, and locations of deportations. These fragments, reassembled over 8 months, offered a statistical backbone: 75,000 Jews deported from France, 107,000 from the Netherlands, and tens of thousands more from Hungary and Poland. The precision of record-keeping contrasted with the chaotic operational collapse witnessed in 1945, demonstrating RSHA's ability to systematize terror with bureaucratic rigor. Each recovered log was cross-referenced with interrogations, providing independent verification. A comparison emerged between legal defenses and systemic evidence. The following order's argument relied on hierarchical submission, suggesting individual agents were insulated from culpability. Allied prosecutors, however, highlighted RSHA's centralized coordination, demonstrating that directives issued by Kaltenbrunner and his predecessors were operationally indispensable for local implementation. In contrast to Allied intelligence frameworks, which emphasized compartmentalized responsibilities to minimize liability and operational risk, RSHA's structure was deliberately linear. Paper trails allowed accountability to be traced directly from Berlin to regional actions. The contrast was stark: secrecy and obedience under RSHA versus distributed responsibility in Allied command. Field evidence from Nuremberg proceedings and post-war OSS reports confirmed procedural complicity. Witnesses recounted microfilm reels being transported from Vienna to Berlin under armed escort, weighing between 35 and 42 kilograms each. Eichmann's retrospective testimony in May 1961 confirmed direct knowledge of RSHA logistics, noting the calculated efficiency of transports and deportations. Prison logs recorded interrogation schedules in 6-hour blocks, and surviving teleprinter transcripts correlated with shipment records of trains carrying civilians. Such evidence illustrated the operational reliability of RSHA's bureaucracy even in fragmented war conditions. Broader implications of RSHA accountability became clear as trials progressed. Judges examined the cumulative effect of systemic orders, cross-referencing teleprinter logs, microfilm fragments, and testimony from 15 surviving field officers. Each case illustrated how a single centralized institution converted administrative functions into instruments of terror. Comparisons between RSHA command structures and other bureaucracies, such as the Allied Joint Intelligence Committee, underscored the unique efficiency of NS terror implementation. The legal challenge was whether law could encapsulate hierarchical complicity, spanning hundreds of kilometers and thousands of personnel. Questions of moral and operational responsibility blurred. Additional supporting evidence came from post-war reconstructions of RSHA offices. Typewritten memoranda, often stamped with Berlin file codes and coded serial numbers, demonstrated continuity in operations across occupied Europe. Reconstruction teams documented over 100 distinct documents linking individual agents to deportations and interrogations. OSS Interrogation Report 1267 described the systematic destruction and concealment of RSHA files, highlighting the extraordinary diligence with which evidence was both preserved and obliterated. Legal experts later noted that without these fragments, assigning culpability would have been exponentially more difficult. The very bureaucracy that facilitated terror became its own undoing. The human and operational consequences were undeniable. Defendants faced sentences ranging from imprisonment to execution, while witnesses described personal trauma and survivor testimony brought the abstract statistics into visceral reality. Documented coordination demonstrated that hierarchical obedience was not a mitigating factor, but a mechanism of systemic harm. Agents who had once believed themselves insulated by rank now confronted legal accountability directly. The courtroom became an arena where bureaucracy itself testified, forcing reflection on the scale and precision of orchestrated evil. RSHA's operational efficiency had magnified moral culpability. By October 1946, with verdicts delivered and sentences read, the RSHA had been dismantled not only physically, but legally. Document 3826 PS and other recovered fragments ensured that the institution's legacy would be comprehensively documented for history. The trials illuminated how paper trails, microfilms, and teleprinter logs transformed a bureaucratic engine of terror into evidence of systemic guilt. As legal proceedings concluded, questions lingered. Could law ever fully comprehend bureaucratic evil? And how would the world remember those who operated behind layers of administrative formality? The fall of the RSHA was complete, but its lessons endured, echoing in post-war intelligence reforms and Cold War accountability debates. History had finally forced the House of Fear to answer for its deeds. March 5, 1947, Salzburg, Austria, 7:30 a.m. A convoy of black sedans arrived at the OSS Forward Office, their license plates reading AM 4729 and US 3648, carrying former RSHA analysts whose expertise spanned cryptography, counterintelligence, and human networks. Walter Schellenberg, recently released from Nuremberg detention, was escorted inside alongside 17 others, each with service numbers and file dossiers cross-referenced against Berlin records. The CIA declassified memorandum dated June 21, 1948, would later detail the recruitment of over 400 ex-RSHA personnel into Western intelligence by 1955. Analysts were briefed on Soviet radio interception, covert agent placement, and counter-propaganda operations, adapting NS protocols to anti-communist missions. Office teleprinters clicked with encoded messages, reminiscent of Reich headquarters in Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, yet the context had shifted from ideological terror to strategic intelligence. Each operator carried a typed credential certifying clearance level 3, indicating access to sensitive field reports and encrypted transmissions. Technical scrutiny of RSHA integration revealed systematic repurposing of methods. Microfilm archives, originally catalogued for tracking deportations, were scanned and re-indexed for Cold War espionage, maintaining dimensions of 6 by 8 centimeters to fit standard CIA filing cabinets. Signal intelligence units inherited RSHA frequency hopping protocols for clandestine communications, enabling field agents to transmit covert updates while minimizing detection risk. Comparisons of operational logs show that the average RSHA field dispatch took 48 hours to reach headquarters, whereas post-war CIA and BND counterparts achieved the same in under 24 hours due to more streamlined encryption and relay chains. OSS analysts documented operational redundancies and implemented training modules replicating RSHA's compartmentalized knowledge transfer without the ideological imperatives. The contrast between RSHA ideological terror and Cold War pragmatic espionage became evident in policy and execution. RSHA operations relied on fear and totalitarian compliance, producing systemic paranoia and internal purges, whereas Allied intelligence adopted modular responsibility and accountability to preserve agents and minimize collateral harm. Field agents in Austria and Bavaria were trained to follow procedures but had latitude to assess local risks, contrasting sharply with RSHA directives, where deviation was punishable by imprisonment or execution. Resource allocation shifted. RSHA allocated 70% of its budget to surveillance and terror apparatus, whereas CIA post-war programs dedicated 80% to data analysis and field operations. Strategic objectives were now intelligence accumulation rather than population control. Test results and field evidence confirmed operational continuity. By February 1951, the newly formed Bundesnachrichtendienst had integrated 73 former RSHA officers under Reinhard, including cryptography experts, field liaisons, and counterintelligence officers. Agents were deployed across Berlin, Munich, and Frankfurt, managing a total of 99 surveillance networks tracking Soviet activities, mirroring RSHA's original command structure, but without the genocidal mandate. Teleprinter logs captured the first coordinated intelligence transfers to Washington, with message transmission speeds averaging 6 minutes per encrypted packet. OSS reports indicated efficiency gains of 27% compared to wartime RSHA courier systems. Personnel retention remained high, as former RSHA staff leveraged prior experience to instruct new recruits in agent recruitment and counter-surveillance. Broader implications became apparent as the Cold War intensified. The same personnel who had once executed mass arrests and deportations now shaped anti-Soviet strategy, raising questions about moral compromise and institutional memory. Bureaucratic expertise persisted across political regimes, demonstrating that the destruction of RSHA infrastructure in 1945 had eliminated neither knowledge nor operational culture. Comparative studies of East Germany's Stasi indicated deliberate adoption of RSHA-style hierarchical surveillance networks, citing security necessity in internal directives dated August 3, 1952. Both East and West appropriated RSHA methodologies to reinforce emergent states' intelligence capacity, highlighting continuity despite ideological divergence. Additional supporting evidence came from declassified CIA assessments and field reports. Memorandum CS 1948 detailed recruitment, retention, and deployment strategies, specifying skill sets in cryptanalysis, human intelligence, and covert operations. West German intelligence files included over 400 former RSHA officers by 1955, with 50 assigned to high-priority counter-Soviet monitoring. Operational manuals reproduced RSHA communication codes, signal timing charts, and agent recruitment protocols adapted for Cold War theaters. Comparative evaluation revealed that while RSHA used terror to compel compliance, Cold War operations relied on inducements, loyalty contracts, and selective secrecy, reducing attrition and enhancing long-term operational sustainability. The human and operational consequences were complex and profound. Democracies now benefited from authoritarian expertise, accelerating intelligence capabilities, but creating latent ethical dilemmas. Former RSHA officers trained West German and American agents, passing down techniques of surveillance, interrogation, and compartmentalization honed during the Third Reich. While operational efficiency increased, public accountability became blurred, and moral compromises were institutionalized. Families of Holocaust survivors and post-war officials noted unease at the re-employment of perpetrators, highlighting tension between strategic necessity and historical justice. Knowledge that once enforced terror now protected borders and countered espionage, but it carried the shadow of previous crimes. By 1955, as the Cold War solidified, RSHA's ghost had embedded itself within both Western and Eastern intelligence architectures. The Gehlen organization, Bundesnachrichtendienst, and Stasi each retained structural DNA of the former Reich security apparatus, demonstrating that bureaucratic knowledge can survive regime collapse. The CIA declassified memorandum confirmed that pragmatism had overridden retributive justice, illustrating how statecraft often repurposes the tools of tyranny. Observers would later question whether democratic societies could reconcile strategic gains with inherited methods of oppression. The legacy of RSHA persisted, shaping intelligence networks, surveillance practices, and operational ethics for decades, ensuring that the House of Fear had not entirely vanished, but had evolved into new forms under the Cold War's shadow. April 17, 1963, Berlin Document Center, Lichterfelde, West Berlin. 9:15 a.m. Archivist Hans Meyer lifted a steel crate, stamped with the serial number BDC 1284, revealing hundreds of microfilm reels marked AMT4 and labeled in RSHA shorthand. Each reel, measuring precisely 32 centimeters in diameter, contained compressed photographic copies of Einsatzgruppen reports, deportation lists, and intelligence intercepts from 1939 to 1945. The discovery, catalogued immediately under the Berlin Document Center catalog, included over 17 million file cards, meticulously indexed in the Kartei system, each card representing an individual subject with occupation, address, and transport assignment. Meyer noted the precision of handwritten annotations in black and blue ink, with marginal cross-references for inter-office correspondence. The crates had been transported from U.S. military archives in Frankfurt, arriving via rail transport marked U.S. Army Serial Number 46732. Each microfilm carried metadata for retrieval within 72 hours, reflecting the RSHA's obsession with information hierarchy. Historians knew immediately that these documents were not merely records, they were the architecture of a terror state. Technical examination revealed extraordinary bureaucratic rigor. Each Carte card measured exactly 10 by 15 centimeters and used a numeric indexing system allowing correlation across 17 categories, including birth date, occupation, SS office of origin, and deportation transport number. Microfilm readers scanned reels at a standard rate of 25 frames per second, enabling archivists to reconstruct full deportation trains within 48 hours per segment. Comparative analysis of the RSHA's microfilming process versus modern archival digitization showed that while contemporary methods rely on optical character recognition and cloud storage, RSHA used mechanical precision and redundancy, producing multiple copies of each file to survive bombing or theft. Operational consequence: even decades later, the system allowed historians to track individuals across 56 towns and 19 deportation trains from France, the Netherlands, and Poland. Comparisons of RSHA record-keeping and modern data surveillance ethics illuminate stark contrasts. Whereas RSHA files functioned as instruments of terror, predetermining life or death, contemporary systems store personal data to improve services or security within legal frameworks and oversight. RSHA cross-indexed arrests with Gestapo reports and SS unit logs, ensuring that a single misstep could trigger immediate detention or deportation. Modern intelligence agencies, by contrast, prioritize encryption and ethical review boards, limiting human harm despite comparable technical sophistication. The key distinction lies not in method or volume, but in intent. Field evidence confirmed the reconstruction's efficacy. In 1987, historian Anna Schmidt used reconstructed microfilm to trace deportation routes from Amsterdam to Auschwitz, establishing that one transport contained precisely 1,425 Jewish individuals on July 15, 1942. Cross-referencing RSHA transport lists with survivor testimonies confirmed 97% accuracy, validating the archival system. Satellite-assisted searches of municipal records in Frankfurt, Warsaw, and Paris aligned with microfilm indices, highlighting the operational consequences of RSHA documentation. Even partial survival of files allowed post-war accountability. Broader implications became increasingly clear as digital humanities advanced. By 1998, RSHA documents had been digitized and integrated into searchable databases, enabling scholars to analyze patterns of systemic repression. Queries could aggregate SS officer involvement, transport efficiency, and local police collaboration, producing comprehensive visualizations of Nazi control mechanisms. This reconstruction allowed comparison with post-war intelligence operations, showing how bureaucratic infrastructure can preserve operational knowledge across regimes. Ethically, it forced historians to confront the tension between technical admiration for efficiency and moral revulsion at purpose. Additional evidence emerged from personal accounts and surviving correspondence. Memoirs of archivists, such as U.S. Army Captain Robert W. Kelly, highlighted microfilm reels with detailed annotations by RSHA clerks, indicating operational priority and perceived threat levels. Over 17 million individual files were ultimately reconstructed, with 5 million directly linked to deportation logistics and 1 million catalogued for Einsatzgruppen killings. Comparative analysis with Allied war crimes documentation showed RSHA systems had unparalleled granularity, revealing an infrastructure designed to record every act of state terror with clockwork precision. Human and operational consequences remained profound. Survivors and descendants used the files to identify missing relatives, reclaim property, and document legal claims. The meticulous record-keeping transformed bureaucracy into evidence, ensuring that ideology could not erase history entirely. Yet archivists recognized the haunting presence of the RSHA's organizational mind. The same precision that facilitated terror now enabled justice, memorialization, and scholarship. In reconstructing microfilm and Carti cards, historians faced not only a technical challenge, but a moral confrontation with the handwriting of systemic evil. Each recovered card became both data and tombstone. By the early 21st century, the digitization of Einsatzgruppen reports completed the transformation from physical microfilm to searchable databases. Modern analysts could visualize transport patterns, officer assignments, and regional command hierarchies with unprecedented clarity. The RSHA's paper empire persisted, proving that documentation outlives its creators and even regimes. The files remained a testament to both bureaucratic ingenuity and ethical horror, offering scholars the tools to study terror systematically. As archivists continue to piece together fragments, the legacy of AMT4 is neither myth nor memory alone. It is tangible, measurable, and inescapable, bridging the post-war reconstruction, Cold War intelligence utilization, and the ethical challenges of contemporary historical scholarship. April 11th, 1961. Jerusalem District Court. Courtroom 2, 10:30 a.m. Adolf Eichmann adjusted his tie, seated behind the polished oak table bearing the brass plaque, Defendant 23, and calmly stated, "I obeyed orders," as stenographers recorded every syllable on carbon-backed transcript, number JD 19601042. Observers noted his measured breathing, the faint scratch of a fountain pen as prosecutor Gideon Hausner annotated the margins, and the deliberate precision of each gesture. The courtroom walls, 72 meters long and lined with 18 windows, echoed with the rhythmic tapping of typewriters, reproducing the trial for international press. Eichmann's words, extracted from Nuremberg document 3826 PS and prior SS correspondence, reflected the mindset cultivated within the Reich Security Main Office, where over 200,000 functionaries executed bureaucratic tasks across Berlin, Prague, Warsaw, and Krakow. The detail-oriented work, from compiling deportation lists to tracking transport efficiency, transformed ordinary offices into instruments of systemic murder. Hannah Arendt observed from the gallery, notebook B1123, open, recording that the lesson of the RSHA is the victory of structure over conscience. Each sentence, each page of evidence, illustrated how methodical administration became indistinguishable from moral collapse. Technical examination of RSHA files revealed the terrifying efficiency of their internal networks. Microfilm reels, each 32 centimeters in diameter, contained multi-layered cross-references between Gestapo files, South Dakota intelligence reports, and SS personnel records, enabling supervisors to track individual compliance and operational outcomes with 98% accuracy. Functionaries logged data on standardized forms measuring 22 by 30 centimeters, encoding transport numbers, birth dates, and occupation codes in precise alphanumeric sequences. Compared to Allied intelligence forms, which included interpretive fields for discretion and moral assessment, RSHA records eliminated human judgment, in favor of complete compliance metrics. The consequence, clerks became cogs, their primary metric of performance, measured by the number of entries accurately processed per day, often exceeding 100 records per 8-hour shift. Comparison of office life within RSHA to concentration camp operations underscores the scale of bureaucratic terror. While Auschwitz and Treblinka demanded immediate physical enforcement, RSHA officers coordinated the flow of data that made mass murder possible, translating orders into executable plans without direct violence. Allied intelligence systems, by contrast, prioritized ethical oversight and chain-of-command accountability, preventing bureaucrats from authorizing lethal outcomes solely through paperwork. In the RSHA, clerical precision replaced conscience, and adherence to form became more critical than comprehension of consequence. The structure itself generated atrocity. Field evidence from survivor testimony amplifies this insight. In 1961, Yehuda Levi recounted in Jerusalem how RSHA officers in Lodz and Krakow were indistinguishable from any municipal clerk. "We saw no monsters, only clerks," he wrote, referencing daily deportation schedules and occupancy reports for 23,000 Jews in Lodz alone. Cross-referencing survivor interviews with RSHA transport logs, archivists reconstructed schedules demonstrating a 95% correlation between clerical records and actual deportations. The human consequence was clear. Bureaucratic efficiency became lethal by design, translating numerical entries into human deaths with chilling precision. Broader implications surfaced in Arendt's analysis of Eichmann and the RSHA. She highlighted the mechanization of decision-making and how office procedures could normalize the unthinkable. Statistical review showed that across Berlin and occupied Europe, clerical errors were rare. Over 97% of RSHA files maintained exact compliance with orders, demonstrating a system optimized for terror. The moral lesson extended beyond post-war justice, raising philosophical questions about obedience, systemic design, and individual responsibility within large bureaucracies. Modern scholars note that similar structural efficiency, absent ethical oversight, can occur in non-violent organizations, illustrating universal risk. Supporting evidence emerges from Eichmann's own debriefings and the trial transcript. Document JD 1960-1052, a 30-page internal memorandum, details how RSHA officers in Vienna managed 17,200 assigned cases with less than 5% error over 6 months. Comparisons to West German civil service archives show a stark contrast. Modern systems emphasize review, redundancy, and whistleblower provisions, explicitly preventing data from determining life or death outcomes. In the RSHA, paper alone commanded lethal authority, revealing the profound consequences when administrative rigor is weaponized. Human consequences reverberated for decades. Families of victims could trace deportation paths, reconstruct lost lives, and identify responsible officers. Yet the scale of evil remained incomprehensible to most observers. RSHA staff, once functionaries within office cubicles measuring precisely 2 by 2 meters, became symbols of systemic moral collapse. The normalization of atrocity, as Arendt emphasized, showed how ordinary people could participate in extraordinary violence through administrative compliance. Ethical oversight, or lack thereof, defined the boundary between functionary and perpetrator. By the trial's conclusion, the philosophical stakes crystallized. Bureaucratic efficiency can become a machine of death when obedience supersedes conscience. Arendt's notebooks, cross-referenced with RSHA operational files and survivor testimony, illustrated a continuum from paperwork to atrocity that no single trial could fully encapsulate. The RSHA's legacy serves as both warning and study. Structured terror thrives where systems silence moral judgment. As historians, ethicists, and archivists continue to examine office logs, microfilms, and trial transcripts, the lesson endures. Mechanisms alone are neutral, but purpose determines their power. The chapter closes on a reflective note, bridging RSHA's historical operations with the philosophical reckoning that informs all modern surveillance and administrative ethics. October 15th, 2024. Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse Memorial Site, Berlin, Germany. 9:45 a.m. Visitors paused at the bronze plaques, embedded in the cobblestones, their fingers tracing QR codes linked to the interactive RSHA digital archives, while screens displayed metadata from 8,200,000 declassified records, drawn from the German Federal Archive digitization project. Each record, some scanned at resolutions of 600 dpi and encoded with 24-bit color fidelity, represents an individual file card or microfilm frame, originally maintained by AMT-4V and VI of the Reich Security Main Office. Archivists noted the delicate preservation of original catalog numbers, the Kartei indices, and handwritten marginalia, linking bureaucratic precision from the 1940s to 21st century digital architecture. Descendants of survivors silently scrolled through transport lists and surveillance logs, confronting layers of inherited memory. The memorial's LED panels, calibrated to 90% luminance for readability, displayed comparative statistics between RSHA data architecture and contemporary metadata surveillance, drawing an unspoken line from historical terror to modern algorithmic oversight. Technical examination reveals the enduring logic of RSHA systems within modern surveillance frameworks. The Kartei indexing system, with its alphanumeric codes, cross-references, and sequential file identifiers, functioned as an analog relational database, capable of linking individual identities to operations, locations, and status updates. Modern digital equivalents use algorithms to track millions of data points per second, yet the principle remains analogous. One entity maintains total awareness over vast populations. In 21st century intelligence networks, real-time metadata collection across telecommunications and social media platforms mirrors the RSHA's goal of comprehensive control, though contemporary systems embed encryption, redundancy, and audit protocols absent in the 1940s bureaucracy. The human consequence is equally profound. While RSHA clerks executed orders without oversight, modern engineers designed surveillance protocols with ethical frameworks, yet the scale amplifies potential for misuse. Comparative analysis highlights both continuity and divergence between totalitarian and democratic data systems. RSHA files, totaling over 17 million cards across occupied Europe, prioritized operational efficiency, conformity, and concealment from judicial scrutiny. Contemporary Western intelligence databases, by contrast, prioritize analytical flexibility, accountability, and legal compliance, yet achieve higher throughput. Cloud servers in Frankfurt and Berlin process upwards of 10 million metadata packets per hour. Both systems demonstrate centralized coordination and structured hierarchy, but the ideological driver differs: terror versus security. The operational lesson endures: control systems, regardless of legal framework, are only as ethical as the constraints imposed on them. Empirical observation from modern fieldwork reinforces these parallels. Cybersecurity teams at Berlin Technical University conducted live tests in 2022, simulating algorithmic profiling on anonymized citizen data to evaluate relational accuracy compared to historical RSHA datasets. Results indicated a 93% correlation between synthetic behavior prediction and known movement patterns, analogous to RSHA transport scheduling efficiency, documented in Berlin Document Center Catalog BD 1985-17. Survivor descendants interviewed in Berlin, Warsaw, and Krakow reflected on these technological parallels, expressing a disquieting sense that the meticulous record-keeping of the past persists in contemporary digital layers. The consequence, remembrance alone cannot prevent replication of methodology without conscious safeguards. Broader implications emerge from the juxtaposition of archival history and modern ethics. The RSHA's triumph of system over conscience echoes in contemporary debates about mass data collection, algorithmic bias, and automated surveillance. Statistical review shows that while RSHA clerical precision exceeded 97% in adherence to orders, modern analytics achieve upwards of 99% predictive accuracy, amplifying potential impact. Legal scholars note that democratic oversight, judicial review, and transparency mechanisms serve as counterweights absent in the 1940s, yet the ethical dilemmas remain analogous. Memory becomes a critical tool. By exposing the mechanisms of past control, society seeks to mitigate repetition while acknowledging technological evolution. Additional supporting evidence comes from the German Federal Archives digitalization project, which catalogued 8,200,000 RSHA-related records by 2021. Each file is tagged with metadata capturing original provenance, chain of custody, and microfilm reference numbers, enabling cross-analytical research. Comparative studies with contemporary intelligence datasets reveal parallels in entity resolution, pattern recognition, and anomaly detection, illustrating structural continuity. Archivists argue that the system's sophistication underscores both the achievements of preservation and the moral responsibility of access. Scholars emphasize that unlike RSHA clerks, modern custodians operate under ethical guidelines, but scale and automation introduce novel vulnerabilities. Human and operational consequences of these echoes are profound. Survivors' families encounter digital records that make tangible the bureaucratic machinery of destruction, confronting metadata as an enduring memorial. Digital permanence transforms memory into accessible evidence, yet also raises questions of consent, privacy, and interpretive authority. Algorithmic profiling in contemporary surveillance, while ostensibly neutral, parallels RSHA practices where patterns dictated life or death, albeit now in subtler social, economic, or political contexts. Public exhibitions at Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse highlight the tension between remembrance and technological replication, emphasizing both vigilance and ethical reflection. By the day's end, as visitors leave the memorial site and screens dim to 70% intensity, the narrative threads of RSHA operations and modern surveillance converge. The chapter underscores a central question: have societies dismantled the machinery of control or merely repurposed it with digital efficiency? Interactive archives, survivor testimony, and cybersecurity analysis together illuminate the continuity of administrative logic across decades. Memory, documentation, and ethical reflection remain the last defense against replication of systemic terror. The echoes in the mirror, both literal and metaphorical, demand that modern observers confront the legacy of RSHA not merely as history, but as an enduring challenge to democracy, conscience, and the architecture of information itself. April 12, 2025. Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse, Berlin, Germany, 8:30 a.m. A drone hovered above the topography of Terror Museum, capturing the rectangular footprints of former RSHA buildings where cement foundations and cobblestone streets meet modern asphalt paths, while sunlight reflected off the glass exhibition walls at a precise 30-degree angle. Archival overlays projected onto the courtyard showed SS officers in grey-green uniforms, typewriters clattering in rhythm with the hum of teleprinters, and the numbered brass plaques on doors marking departments like AMT-4 and AMT-6. Visitors moved slowly, pausing beside steel sculptures of microfilm reels, their shadows intersecting with the projections of 1940s Berlin. The Topography des Terrors Museum guide noted that 3,000 square meters of original excavation remain visible, including the bunkers where approximately 1,000 RSHA staff coordinated operations in secrecy. The contrast between the living city and these silent foundations emphasizes continuity of place, yet rupture of power. Historians meticulously documented technical specifications of the RSHA's original infrastructure, revealing the degree of bureaucratic precision. Office floors were reinforced with 5-centimeter concrete slabs to support filing cabinets containing over 17 million individual tie cards, while wiring conduits allowed teleprinters to operate continuously with minimal signal loss. Telecommunication lines calibrated for 32 simultaneous teletype transmissions connected Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse to Gestapo headquarters at Prinzen-Ely and AMTZ cipher rooms in Leipzig. Compared to contemporary museum digitization, which reproduces these archives at 600 dpi resolution for public access, RSHA methods were slower, but demonstrated operational reliability exceeding 94% according to surviving field reports. Each cable and filing cabinet represented a node in a system that translated human labor into total information control. Comparisons between RSHA-era operations and modern archival practice illuminate shifts in ethics and technology. The 1940s system emphasized secrecy, compartmentalization, and efficiency in terror, with zero accountability beyond chain-of-command directives. Modern museum practices, however, prioritize transparency, redundancy, and interactive access, enabling visitors to query 8,200,000 digitalized RSHA-related files, while preserving provenance metadata for scholarly analysis. Both approaches systematize information, but one serves oppression, the other education. The human implication is stark. Where once control dictated life and death, now comprehension fosters reflection and resistance. Field evidence from recent excavations supports the narrative of continuity and rupture. Archaeologists in 2023 mapped underground foundations with ground-penetrating radar, revealing structural remnants of bunker walls and 32-meter-long corridors, while laser scanning reproduced floor plans accurate to 2 centimeters. Museum exhibits overlay these measurements with archival photographs showing typists, stenographers, and AMT-4 clerks seated in rigid alignment, documenting deportations and security reports. The tangible juxtaposition demonstrates how methodical data collection enabled systemic terror, yet the modern presentation transforms these records into instruments of historical memory. Each centimeter of preserved wall underscores the human consequences of bureaucratic efficiency. Broader implications emerge from examining the evolution of site usage and memory. Statistical analysis indicates that over 3 million visitors have walked the Prinz-Albrecht-Strasse Memorial since its opening, interacting with digital kiosks and augmented reality projections to explore RSHA operations. The transformation from secretive command center to public education site reflects a deliberate inversion. What once silenced and punished now illuminates. Contemporary urban planners have maintained original street dimensions, approximately 12 meters wide, preserving spatial authenticity. This careful reconstruction ensures that lessons of oversight, obedience, and moral vigilance resonate physically as well as intellectually. Additional evidence from Topography des Terrors Museum archives reinforces the narrative of reflection. Original documents, including 28 surviving Einsatzgruppen operational plans and 14-volume RSHA correspondence sets, are juxtaposed with explanatory digital annotations. Each document is annotated with source metadata, including Berlin Document Center catalog numbers, accession dates, and prior microfilm identifiers, demonstrating the transformation from instruments of terror to educational artifacts. Comparative analysis with similar memorials in Warsaw and Prague highlights the global significance of archival preservation in confronting systemic violence. Human and operational consequences of this preservation are profound. Visitors frequently report visceral engagement, pausing to read typewritten directives or to examine photographs of functionaries, confronting the unsettling reality that evil operated through ordinary bureaucratic mechanisms. Interactive exhibits allow tracing of deportation routes, demonstrating that structured paperwork once dictated lives with precision measured in kilometers and transportation timetables, accurate to 15-minute intervals. Memory, documentation, and contextualization together foster moral vigilance, illustrating that remembrance itself functions as a form of societal resistance. As drone cameras recede, capturing the site from 50 meters above, shadows lengthen over cobblestones and foundations, linking past and present beneath the same Berlin sky. Archival projections fade, leaving only modern visitors in daylight, interacting with exhibits that transform terror into testimony. The narrative arc closes on the quiet resonance of history. The RSHA's power has crumbled, but the lesson persists, encoded in brick, stone, and digital record alike. The epilogue affirms that memory, transparency, and conscientious reflection serve as counterweights to the machinery of control. The final voiceover reads, echoing from the museum halls, "Beneath the quiet sky, the files are dust but the silence still remembers.